On my very first day as the new internal auditor for a major Atlanta investment firm, I spotted a silver-framed photograph sitting squarely on the marketing director's desk. The man smiling back at me was my husband of 5 years. Holding back the urge to shatter the glass, I casually pointed to the frame and asked who the handsome guy was. She beamed, flashed a massive diamond ring in my face, and proudly announced that they were getting married in 6 months. I did not scream. I just smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and mentally began tracking every single cent he had ever touched. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through a betrayal while plotting the absolute perfect revenge. My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on finding the dirty money that arrogant people desperately try to hide. My husband Marcus is a high-end luxury real estate broker here in Atlanta. To the outside world, we were the ultimate power couple. We lived in a stunning modern home in Buckhead, drove expensive cars, and spent every Sunday sitting in the front pew of his parents' massive church. His father is a prominent pastor, and preserving the flawless Jenkins family image was treated like a sacred duty. Marcus wore custom-tailored suits and prided himself on being the main provider, always boasting about his massive commissions and exclusive listings. I let him have his ego because I was busy building my own reputation. But over the last few months, Marcus had grown distant. He claimed he was working late to close complicated commercial deals, and I trusted him because I was also buried in 50-hour work weeks investigating corporate fraud. I never imagined that the fraud I needed to investigate was sleeping in my own bed. It all unraveled the morning I stepped onto the executive floor of Aegis Tech. Being hired as their senior internal auditor was a massive leap for my career. I was ready to prove myself to the board of directors. The human resources manager walked me through the glass-walled corridors, introducing me to the department heads. We eventually stopped at the marketing suite. That is where I met Chloe. She was 26, wearing a bright pink designer dress, and possessed the kind of bubbly, naive energy that demanded constant attention. She jumped up to shake my hand, eager to welcome the new executive team member, and immediately offered to show me the best lunch spots around the building. As she leaned over her desk to hand me a welcome packet, my eyes drifted to her dual monitors. Right there, sitting next to her keyboard, was the photograph. All the air vanished from my lungs. The ground felt like it had dropped out from under my feet. Staring back at me from the glossy photo was Marcus. My Marcus. He was wearing the exact same navy blue silk tie I had bought him for our anniversary last year. His arm was wrapped tightly around Chloe's waist, and they were laughing on a beach I instantly recognized as the luxury resort in Miami, where he supposedly went for a solo real estate conference 3 months ago. The ringing in my ears was deafening. My heart pounded so hard against my ribs, I thought my chest might actually crack open. A normal wife might have lost her mind right there. A normal wife might have picked up that silver frame and smashed it against the wall, screaming that the man in the photo was her husband. But I was not just a wife. I was a forensic auditor. Years of professional training kicked in instantly. When you spot a glaring anomaly in the financial ledger, you do not alert the fraudster. You step back. You stay quiet and you gather your evidence. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I took a slow, steady breath, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the frame. What a lovely picture, I said, keeping my voice incredibly light and conversational. Who is the lucky guy? Chloe practically squealed with delight. She held out her left hand, waving a massive, glittering diamond right in my face. That is my fiancé, Marcus. She gushed, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. He is a luxury real estate broker. We just got engaged last month, and we are planning a huge winter wedding. He is honestly the most amazing man in the world. He spoils me rotten. The diamond caught the fluorescent office lights, blindingly bright. It was easily a 4-carat stone custom set in platinum. My analytical brain started running the numbers immediately. I managed all of our household finances. I knew exactly what was in our joint checking accounts, our savings, and our investment portfolios. I knew for an absolute fact that Marcus did not have the legitimate cash flow to buy a ring of that magnitude without me noticing a massive withdrawal. The emotional betrayal of his affair cut me so deeply I could barely breathe, but the math offended me even more. If the money for that rock did not come from our accounts, where exactly was it coming from? Marcus was hiding something much bigger than a mistress. He was hiding a secret income stream, a dark ledger that I was completely unaware of. I simply nodded, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with the woman who thought she was going to marry my husband. Well, congratulations, Chloe, I said with a warm, terrifyingly fake smile. I cannot wait to hear all about him. I walked out of her office with my head held high, my mind already calculating my next move. I was not going to cry. I was going to audit his entire existence until there was absolutely nothing left. I waited exactly 2 hours before making my move. I needed to establish my character perfectly. The supportive, seasoned female executive taking the young, bright-eyed marketing director under her wing. I walked back to Chloe's desk and suggested we grab artisan lattes at that high-end cafe across the street. She eagerly accepted, completely oblivious to the predator sitting right across from her. As we waited for our drinks, I played my part flawlessly. I asked all the right questions, acting fascinated by her whirlwind romance. Chloe was a chronic oversharer. She told me how Marcus had swept her off her feet, how he took her on surprise weekend getaways to Miami, and how he insisted on paying for absolutely everything. Then she dropped the piece of information that truly set off the alarm bells. She took a sip of her vanilla oat milk latte and giggled. Marcus is just so traditional, she said, twirling that massive diamond around her finger. He told me a future wife of his should never have to worry about rent. So he just bought us the most gorgeous townhouse in Midtown, cash. He put the deed in a trust so we have complete privacy. Midtown, cash, trust. Those 4 words echoed in my brain like gunshot blasts. A luxury townhouse in that specific Atlanta zip code started at $800,000. Marcus was successful, but he was not liquid cash millionaire successful. Not legally. I managed our household portfolio. We had a joint investment account that we reviewed together quarterly. We had a heavy mortgage on our Buckhead home. The commission from his luxury real estate sales was impressive, but after taxes, his flashy car leases, and our lifestyle expenses, there was absolutely no way he had $800,000 in undeclared liquid assets just sitting around waiting to be dropped into a private trust. He was funneling dirty money. And if he was funneling it through a trust, he was using a shell company to clean it. The emotional devastation of my failing marriage was instantly eclipsed by the cold, calculating thrill of an audit. I smiled brightly at Chloe, complimenting her on finding such a generous provider. I paid for our coffees, filed the receipt in my mental expense report, and we walked back to the Aegis Tech building. I had already reviewed the company directory and schedule that morning. I knew Chloe had a mandatory marketing strategy meeting at exactly 1 o'clock. It was scheduled for 45 minutes in a conference room on the opposite side of the executive floor. I returned to my corner office and waited. Through the soundproof glass walls, I watched Chloe gather her tablet and notepad. I watched her perfectly styled hair bounce as she walked down the corridor and disappeared into the conference room. The second the heavy oak door clicked shut, I stood up. I reached into my locked briefcase and pulled out a high-speed encrypted flash drive. It is a standard tool for forensic auditors. We use them to clone drives and extract financial histories during hostile corporate raids. Today, I was conducting a raid of my own. I walked out of my office holding a stack of budget reports to maintain my cover. The executive floor was quiet, most of the directors out for late lunches or locked in meetings. I slipped into Chloe's office and pulled the blinds shut just a fraction. She had committed the ultimate corporate sin. She had left her computer completely unlocked. Careless people always make the best targets. I slid the flash drive into the USB port, hidden at the back of her monitor stand. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard company firewall with a few keystrokes I had perfected over the last decade. I did not care about her marketing campaigns or her social media calendars. I ran a targeted search for personal files, saved passwords, browser histories, and local document
tirando a porcaria do
folders.
jogo. Mano,
If Marcus was
juro,
buying her
gente,
houses
nossa,
through blind
que
trust,
estresse que eu
she had
fiquei ontem.
documentation. Chloe struck me as the exact type of woman to save every confirmation email, digital receipt, and romantic text message to gloat over later. A gray progress bar appeared on the screen.
Gosto nem de lembrar.
10%, 20%.
Eu fico
The extraction was
puto,
fast, but the dead silence in her office made every second feel like a punishing hour.
Vitória! É
My heart
Vitória?
drummed a steady, heavy beat
Gente,
against
não
my
consigo
ribs.
enxergar.
I kept my
Vitória.
eyes
Salve,
locked
Vitória,
on the
seja
glass
bem-vinda.
wall, monitoring the hallway.
Não, Dabizinho.
35%,
Aqui nessa roxinha.
50%. Then the
roxinha
conference
aqui, ó.
room door down the hall swung
Essa
open.
aqui. Nessa aqui eu
A
tô.
group of junior
Tô
marketing
aqui e na
associates
roxinha.
walked out, followed closely by Chloe. She was checking
Tamo
her
tendo
phone,
que
laughing at something a
Naomi
colleague
e
said,
Joel
and
carregando
walking
o time,
straight toward
porque,
her
né, pelo
office.
amor de Deus, hoje eu tô uma boteca. Na
75%.
verdade, eu sou
Come
todo
on.
dia, né? Mas tem
I
dia
tapped
que
my manicured
é
fingernails
impressionante, nem
silently
parece que sou
against
eu
the
jogando,
mahogany
né?
desk.
Espero
85%.
que todos percam.
Chloe
Mano,
stopped at a cubicle halfway
nossa,
down the
que
hall
ódio.
to admire
Não
a
gosto muito de
coworker's
lembrar, não.
shoes. That bought me exactly 10
Vitória?
seconds.
Você
95%.
já me acompanha
She
por
started
aqui?
walking
Faz
again.
muito tempo
Her
ou
heels
não?
clicked
Chegou agora?
sharply
É
against the
nova?
hardwood floor. Click, click, click. 100%. Extraction complete. I snatched the flash drive from the port and shoved it deep
Bora.
into my
Mas acho
blazer
que
pocket.
não é a
I
última
grabbed
do
my stack
do
of
Neymar.
budget
Mano,
reports
o
and stepped
foda
away
é que a
from the
gente sabe
desk
que o Neymar
just as
não erra,
Chloe
né,
walked
mano?
through her office door.
O pênalti ele não erra
She jumped
nenhuma.
slightly, her hand going to her
Impressionante, né?
chest.
Impressionante quando ele ia
Oh,
bater, ele já sabia
Naomi,
que
I did
ia,
not see you
ia
there.
acertar.
I offered her a
Foda.
polite,
Foda
apologetic
que foi no
smile,
final do
my
jogo,
heart rate
mano. Se não
entirely
mano,
concealed behind a
se
mask
não
of professional
tivesse
grace.
errado
I am so sorry, Chloe.
porra de
I was just
pênalti
dropping
no
off the quarterly
começo do
budget
jogo.
revisions for your department. I
A
saw
gente
you
tinha
were away
chance.
from your
A
desk,
gente tinha
so I just set
chance.
them right here. I tapped the neat stack of papers I had placed next to her keyboard. Chloe beamed completely unsuspicious.
Você tá
Thank you
podendo
so
adicionar no
much.
Free Fire?
You are so on
Claro que
top of
tô. É
things.
só você
I
mandar
gave
seu
her one
ID
last professional
no
nod.
LivePix.
Oh, you have no idea, I replied. I walked back to my office, locked the heavy door behind me, and plugged the encrypted drive into my personal laptop. The hunt had officially begun. Sunday arrived with a suffocating heat typical of an Atlanta summer, bringing with it the one weekly obligation I despised, even before I knew my husband was a fraud. Sunday dinner at the Jenkins estate was not a family gathering. It was a heavily choreographed theatrical performance, and attendance was strictly mandatory. Marcus drove us to his parents' house in his matte black sports car. The 30-minute drive from Buckhead was spent in complete silence, save for the low hum of the engine and the jazz playing softly through the expensive sound system. He kept his eyes locked on the road, his jaw tight. His mind probably miles away with the marketing director, who thought she was getting a winter wedding.
Naomi, você
I sat perfectly
é
still
a
in the
maioral
passenger seat,
diva
my designer handbag resting
perfeita
on my lap.
total dessa
Tucked
live.
safely inside the zipped interior pocket was the encrypted flash drive. I had spent the entire weekend
Gente,
running
não-
decryption
Mano,
algorithms on
é a
Chloe's
primeira
files,
vez,
peeling
é a
back
primeira
the first layers
vez,
of Marcus's
que
financial
eu vou
deceptions.
jogar em squad
Now I
e
had to sit
uma
at a
pessoa
dining
só
table
do
and break
squad
bread with the man I was
consegue
preparing
fazer
to
o bui
destroy.
assim, tá?
We pulled up to
Tá.
the imposing wrought iron
Ali da
gates of Pastor
Naomi.
Thomas and Vivian Jenkins' sprawling estate. The gates swung open to
Eu vou até
reveal a
adicionar-
massive
Naomi, eu vou até te
circular
adicionar.
driveway
Que você
already
vai ver, foi
lined with a
incrível,
fleet of
entendeu? Foi coisa
European
de
luxury
diva.
vehicles.
Fala, Gabi. Você
This
não vai
was the
adicionar
house
hoje o
that
Joel. Você fez
tithes
porcaria
built.
nenhuma.
Thomas was the charismatic leader of one of the largest mega churches in the city,
Fala, Gabi.
and
Sou
Vivian was
nova
his
por aqui, seja
flawless,
muito bem-vinda, Vitória.
image-obsessed first lady. They sold
Espero
a
que você goste
highly
das lives.
profitable brand
A
of
gente faz live aqui
aspirational
na
black
segunda,
excellence
terça,
to their
quarta-
congregation,
não, segunda,
masking
terça,
their
quinta e
deep-rooted
sexta,
materialism
ok?
behind
Você pode me
tailored
acompanhar
Sunday
aqui também,
suits.
nas outras
The
redes
moment
sociais,
Marcus
se você
shifted the
gostar.
car into
Se você
park,
não
his
gostar,
entire demeanor
vai fazer o quê?
changed.
Não gostou, né?
The distant, cold man who had ignored me
Gente,
all morning
obrigada. Eu
vanished.
vou chamar você,
In his
Naomi,
place
tá?
emerged the charismatic, doting husband. He practically leaped out of the driver's seat,
Naomi,
jogging around the
já
front of the
saia,
car to
já
open my
saia, que eu vou
door
te chamar.
before I could even unbuckle my seatbelt. He offered me his
Vai
hand,
ter
flashing that
Copa
million-dollar
Feminina.
real estate smile. My stomach turned. The mere thought of his skin touching
A
mine
Copa
made me want to
Feminina de
recoil in
futebol vai ser no
absolute
Brasil, né?
disgust, but I was a professional. I placed my hand in his, letting him help me out of the low car. His grip was firm and
Salvador,
practiced.
coisa boa.
He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling me close against his side as we walked up the sweeping marble
Não,
steps to
aqui,
the double
isso.
mahogany front doors. Look at us. Marcus murmured, leaning down to press a performative
Cadê?
kiss to my temple, just as the front
Elô,
door
vai
swung
querer
open.
jogar?
The perfect
Tobias, vai
couple.
querer
I
jogar?
smiled brightly, fighting the urge to wipe my temple clean. We
Hoje não
stepped
estarei
into the
presente
grand
na live,
foyer,
infelizmente,
instantly
com a
enveloped by
eliminação
the
do
smell of
Neymar da
expensive
Copa,
catering
perdi pouco
and
de
Vivian's
empolgação para
heavy
acompanhar
signature
os jogos.
floral
Vou
perfume.
torcer de longe e
The
espero que
foyer was
entendam.
designed to
Nos
intimidate,
vemos na
featuring a
próxima
sweeping
live,
double
né?
staircase, imported crystal chandeliers, and
Shaolin,
massive gilded portraits of the
Shaolin, você
Jenkins
não
family
tem
staring down like
desculpa,
modern
você não pode
royalty.
ficar triste,
There's
cara.
my
Você
beautiful
prometeu. Eu
daughter-in-law!
baixei a
A
merda
booming
do
voice
jogo que
echoed
você
across the marble floor.
prometeu que ia jogar com a
Pastor
gente.
Thomas walked toward us, his arms wide
Gente,
open, wearing a bespoke
eu também
suit
tô
that
puta,
cost
cara.
more than a
Ó,
teacher's
gente, eu tô-
annual
Boker mandou
salary.
R$
He pulled
5.
me into a heavy
Nail,
embrace,
você
patting
pode
my
me
back
adir e
with
me chama
heavy,
para jogar
patronizing
uma
strokes.
partida.
And my
Meu e de
brilliant son. Look at you
566
two.
milhões e
Vivian appeared moments later, descending the
51.693.
stairs with the grace of a woman
Tá,
who
deixa eu
spent
ver
half
aqui,
her
deixa eu
week at the
pegar.
country club
Deixa
and
eu
the other half
pegar.
at the plastic surgeon.
Mano,
She was draped in silk, dripping with diamonds that caught the light with every
vou ter que
step.
repetir a mensagem,
She
cara.
glided over to us, offering her cheek
Qual que
for
é o
Marcus to
ID? Ô,
kiss
Joker,
before turning
escreve
her
seu ID no
critical
chat
gaze
aqui,
on
por
me.
favor.
Naomi, darling! Vivian said, her voice dripping with that distinct southern sweetness that always disguised an insult.
Bando Shaolin. É isso aí,
You look
Itália.
so tired. Those long hours at that new
Aquele
corporate
negócio
job
de remada
are just draining the
verdinho.
life right out of
Aqui,
your face.
beleza. Vou adicionar você
I told
aqui,
Marcus he needs to take you on a vacation. A woman should not have to work herself into the ground when she has a husband who provides so well. I kept my smile perfectly glued in place. Thank you for your concern, Vivian. But I actually love my work. It keeps my mind sharp. Vivian gave a soft, dismissive laugh, waving her hand as if waving away a pesky fly. Oh, but a sharp mind does not keep a man warm at night, honey. You need to focus on what
Pronto.
truly matters.
Beleza,
Building
ninguém
a
respondeu.
home,
Você vai querer ver.
giving
Itália,
us
você vai querer vir com a
grandchildren.
gente?
Marcus needs a wife, not a roommate with a briefcase.
Chamar o nosso-
Marcus
nosso
tightened
mod,
his
ver se
grip
ele
on
quer
my
vir.
waist, chuckling along with his mother, as if she had just told a delightful joke. Do not worry, Mom, Marcus said, kissing the
Eita,
side of
aquele
my
negócio
head
de
again.
remada Vicky me deu
Naomi
tanta
is
raiva.
just
eu saí de perto da
ambitious.
TV. Nossa,
But I take
cara,
very good
que
care of
ódio.
her.
Oi, Nayu.
I
Oi,
make sure she has
Simone.
everything
Tudo
she
bem?
could ever want. I
você
stared
vai
at him,
vir? Cadê
marveling
você,
at the sheer
cara?
audacity of his
Agora eu vou
lie.
ter que rejeitar
He provided
o-
everything I could ever want while
Itália.
simultaneously
Itália, eu vou
buying an
rejeitar porque eu tô faz
$800,000
tempo
townhouse
chamando
for a
Tobias,
26-year-old
por
marketing
causa que na live
director.
passada ele chegou no
He
final
stood there
da
in his
live,
parents'
né?
immaculate foyer,
Você vai querer
projecting
vir
the
ou não?
image of the
Nossa, mas
ultimate
decide.
provider, soaking
Se
up his
decide,
parents'
se
admiration.
decide.
He was a master manipulator,
deixa ele ir?
entirely
Então tá
convinced
bom.
of his
Então,
own
pera, agora eu vou ter que
invincibility.
chamar o
We
Itália.
moved from the
Peraí.
foyer into the expansive
Convidar.
formal
Vem,
living
Itália.
room where the
Vem,
rest of the
Itália.
extended family and a few
Voltei.
high-ranking church
Pois é, tamo
elders
aqui,
had
tamo aqui.
gathered
Tão
before dinner.
todos bem
The room was a
putos
cacophony of clinking crystal
por causa
glasses
do
and
jogo do
loud,
Brasil de
boastful
ontem.
conversations.
Entendeu?
Everywhere I
Opa, sou
looked,
fugaz.
someone was
Mano, eu tô
flexing their
liberando
wealth.
código de equipe.
Uncles bragging about stock portfolios, cousins flashing new
Mano,
watches,
que
aunts
estresse.
discussing their
Me
latest
estressei.
luxury renovations.
Beleza,
It was
então
an
na próxima
exhausting echo
partida,
chamber of
bem,
ego and vanity.
Tobias,
Marcus immediately
Pampiquim
slipped right into his element.
e o nosso
He guided me through the
novo
room like an
amigo
accessory,
adicionado Joker.
keeping one
Tem
hand
os três.
possessively on the small of my back
Perfeito?
while he
Pode
worked
ser.
the
Boa
crowd.
noite, seja bem-vindo.
He shook hands, slapped backs, and launched into a highly exaggerated story about a
Bora lá,
commercial real
bora
estate deal
lá.
he had supposedly closed the previous week. He threw around inflated numbers, making sure everyone in the room knew exactly how successful he was. As he spoke, I stood
Tu comprou a
quietly
pasta
by
de
his
dente?
side,
Mulher,
nodding
eu
at the
recebo,
appropriate
né,
intervals,
da Garena.
laughing on cue, playing the exact
Oi,
role of the
Nail, quanto
adoring
tempo?
wife that the
Salve,
Jenkins
Manoel, quanto
family
tempo, né?
demanded.
Pois é,
But behind my
voltei.
polite
No
smile,
PC,
my mind was
na verdade,
racing.
nem sei se ele tá tancando,
I looked at
né?
Marcus,
É uma
really looked at
incógnita.
him, and saw exactly what he was.
Ai, desculpa
He
aí.
was a hollow shell of a man, propped up by
Ai,
stolen money
Mano,
and a
faz tempo
desperate
que
need
você
for
não vai jogar com a
validation.
gente, né?
The hypocrisy
Ô,
of the
Joker, eu quero
entire
ver
room
você
was
dando a cal
suffocating.
pra gente, já
They
que você
sat
é
in their
novo.
multi-million-dollar
Aqui, quem é
mansion
novo
judging
tem que dar
anyone who did
cal,
not meet their
entendeu?
impossible
Quem é novo
standards
tem
of
que dar cal.
perfection, completely blind to the
Então
rot
aí, ó, fica com
festering
você
within
a
their own
responsa
bloodline.
hoje, beleza?
Or maybe they were
Eu sou
not
but-
blind.
Ai,
Maybe they
meu
just did
Deus,
not
Dé,
care as
quase
long
que eu
as
li
the
que
checks
outra
kept
coisa, em vez
clearing
de eu ler, eu
and the
sou
image
boteca,
remained
quase que eu li. Eu
intact.
sou
I took a slow sip of the iced tea a server had handed me, letting the cool liquid soothe my
mulher, que
dry
perigo. Oi,
throat.
amiga, tudo bem? Tudo,
Let
Ana
them
Clara?
talk, I
Seja
thought to
bem-vinda.
myself.
Naí,
Let
o
Marcus
GTRP
brag
parou
about
mesmo?
his imaginary
Parei,
wealth.
Simone.
Let
GTRP,
Vivian
não
criticize
jogo
my
mais.
career.
É, eu vou
Let
entrar
Thomas
dia
play
só
the holy
pra
patriarch.
fazer um RP lá
They had
de
absolutely no
aniversário
idea that the quiet, dutiful woman
meu sobrinho
standing
lá,
in their living
que a
room
Amanda
was
pediu,
meticulously
mas eu
building the
não
cage that was
não
going
jogo
to
mais.
lock them all
Agora eu
away.
vou focar bastante em
I
GTA
just needed
6,
to
né,
survive
quando
this dinner
sair.
and get back to my encrypted
Aliás, tem vídeo
files,
novo no canal.
because the
Quem
real
não foi
show
ver,
had
gente?
not even
Quem não
started
foi ver
yet.
meu vídeo novo
The
no
chime of
canal,
a
ó, eu vou
crystal
ficar bem
bell
triste com
echoed through
vocês.
the
Eu vou
expansive
lembrar,
living
tá?
room,
Quando eu
signaling that
tiver
dinner was
famosa,
ready to be
eu nem
served.
vou lembrar de vocês, nem
The
vou lembrar
crowd of
aqui do
extended
comentando no
family and
vídeo,
church
tá?
elders began to migrate
Brincadeira.
slowly toward the
Mulher,
formal
que é
dining
isso?
room,
Mulher
a
acontece,
cavernous
né?
space dominated
Escolhendo
by a
rápido as
massive
coisas.
mahogany
Mas
table
bora lá.
that could easily seat 20 people.
Eu quero...
I walked beside
Cadê? Por que
Marcus,
que o
keeping
italiano
my
tá falando?
posture
Itália, por que você
perfectly
tá
straight,
falando?
my
Não
expression
gosto.
an unreadable mask
Ah,
of
tá. Eu
polite
gosto de
compliance.
ficar em silêncio,
As we
não.
took our assigned seats near the
Mas
head
tu
of the
já é
table,
famosa. Mulher,
a
não
sudden flurry
conta, é
of loud
segredo.
performative apologies drifted in from the foyer.
Então já
Jasmine
pegue.
Marcus's younger
Pegue
sister
ele,
had
faça
finally
a purê
arrived.
dele.
She swept into the dining room like a celebrity gracing a red carpet draped in
Boa,
head-to-toe
Pampiquinha. Eu vou
Chanel,
lembrar,
carrying
vou
a
lembrar
tiny
vocês.
designer handbag that cost more than my first car. Right behind her was her husband Tyler
Não, eu
Sterling.
jogo Free Fire toda vez que
Tyler
tem
was a
live.
white investment
Mas é
fund
porque
manager
no
who
TikTok
wore his
eu não
privilege
tava
like a
fazendo
second
live, só
skin.
na
He had
roxinha.
slicked back hair, a perpetually smug expression, and a heavy gold Patek Philippe watch
Voltei.
that he made sure to flash
Eu
every
falei pra
time
você
he
falar no
adjusted his
chat
cuffs.
depois lá pra eu poder te dar moderador.
Tyler loved being the wealthy white son-in-law in a prominent black family. He reveled in the specific kind of power and attention it gave him, always positioning himself as the financial genius of the Jenkins clan. Jasmine and Tyler took the seats directly across from Marcus and me.
Vídeo novo de quê?
Jasmine
Só pra
immediately
saber
leaned
qual é o
across the
assunto?
table to kiss her brother on the cheek, completely ignoring my existence.
É um vídeo de
Tyler gave Marcus a
despedida de
firm
GTA V,
masculine
então é
nod,
um vídeo
the kind that
contando
communicated a
história, né,
shared
da
arrogant
campanha de
secret
GTA
between
V.
two men who believed they
Eu acho que ficou
owned
bem
the
legal o
world.
vídeo.
Pastor Thomas stood at the
Eu
head of the
recomendo
table
você
and began
assistir,
a
porque a
long,
galera
booming
gostou,
prayer.
assim.
He
A
did
galera
not
que
just bless
assistiu
the
o vídeo,
food,
claro.
he spent 5 solid minutes thanking
Veja lá,
God for
veja
his
lá.
own
Depois você me dá
incredible
um feedback,
leadership,
que você é
for
a pessoa mais
Marcus's
sincera
booming real
desse
estate
chat,
success,
cara.
and for Tyler's
Tobias,
unmatched financial
a pessoa mais sincera
investments.
desse chat. Se tiver
He thanked the
uma
Lord
merda,
for
tá
blessing the
ligado?
Jenkins
Eu sei que você vai falar
family
que tá uma
with
merda.
overflowing wealth, treating divine grace like a corporate bonus
Então
structure.
é isso. Assista lá e
I
depois
kept
dê o
my head
feedback.
bowed, my eyes fixed firmly on
Tudo
the
bem,
intricate
tia
pattern
Nath?
of the china
Fala.
plate in front of me,
Tudo bem,
waiting for the
tia
performance
Nath.
to end.
Nayu,
The
arrumou.
moment the
Boa.
loud chorus of amen concluded, a team of uniformed servers entered the room carrying silver platters of roasted lamb garlic mashed potatoes and perfectly seared asparagus.
Na roxa e na
The clinking
vermelha,
of
agora
heavy
foi só pra
silverware filled the air.
ver algumas
I took a
lives
small
mais.
portion of
Verdade.
vegetables and a single slice of lamb,
Dé,
arranging them
eu quero
neatly
saber
on
se
my
a Dé foi
plate.
ver o
I had
vídeo.
zero
Dé, você foi ver o
appetite, but I
vídeo?
knew better than to
Você
leave an
odeia.
empty plate in Vivian's house. Naomi!
Você
Darling,
tem
you
duas
are eating
opções.
like a bird again, Vivian
Não usar
called out
nenhuma
from the
emoji de
opposite end of the
sapo,
table.
entendeu?
Her voice sliced through the ambient
mais
chatter,
emoji de
instantly
sapo,
drawing the attention
ou
of
ver o meu
everyone
vídeo
seated
e
nearby.
usar emoji de sapo.
You really need to
Olha
put
só,
some
coisa
meat on
boa.
those bones.
Boa noite, Lauro de
A strong,
Bontan.
healthy woman is what
Mano,
Marcus
lá vem o
needs.
Santi.
Look at
Toda vez-
Jasmine. She
Mano, é a
positively
segunda live. Na
glows.
primeira ele vem...
I glanced
boa
across the
noite,
table at Jasmine, who
Lauro
was
de
currently
Babi.
demanding
Ele
that
mandou-
Tyler cut a
Lauro
piece
de
of
Babi
meat
não,
for her.
acho que ele mandou Babi só.
She offered her mother a saccharine smile.
Ai,
That
que
is
ódio.
because Tyler takes
Gente, eu
such
não
good
tanco
care of me.
essa
Mama
skill de
Jasmine
tampa.
purred, resting her hand
Cadê o link,
theatrically on
moderação?
her husband's
É esse
arm.
link que tá passando no chat,
He
você não
just
tá
booked
vendo?
us a month-long
assim,
trip
vídeo
to St.
novo,
Bart's for our
meu Deus,
anniversary.
Se fosse
He told
o
me
bicho,
to just
mordia
pack my
até.
bags and
Se
let him
fosse o
handle
bicho, mordia
everything
até.
else. That is what a real provider
Amei,
does.
vou ver aqui todos
He
os
lets
dias.
his wife
Ai,
rest.
Ana Clara,
Vivian
para.
beamed with pride, clasping her
mentindo.
hands together.
Olha que eu lembro.
Exactly.
Quando a pessoa fala
That
assim,
is how a marriage is supposed to
quando a pessoa fala
function.
assim,
The man builds the kingdom and the
vou
woman
vir aqui
enjoys
todos
the
os
castle.
dias. Pode ter certeza na
She
próxima
turned
live
her
eu tô
sharp
aqui
gaze
falando,
back
gente,
to me,
cadê fulano
her
de tal
eyes
que ia
narrowing with
aparecer?
undisguised
Eu falo,
judgment.
tá? Eu cobro.
But
Fala,
you,
Fafá.
Naomi, you are
Meu
always
Deus,
so
amiga,
exhausted,
agora que eu vi.
working 50
Fafá,
hours a week in an office
cadê
crunching
você na
numbers.
live da roxinha?
It is just not
A
natural
Fafá
for
é
a
minha
woman
amiga,
of your
gente,
standing.
uma diva.
You are married
Já
to a
conheci ela
Jenkins.
pessoalmente.
You should be
Ela tinha que vir
organizing charity
aqui pra
galas,
Curitiba
hosting luncheons,
conhecer,
joining the church
roletar,
auxiliary board.
passear por aqui.
Instead, you are hiding behind a desk like a
Não tá
common
abrindo o
clerk.
link?
The room grew
Uai.
uncomfortably quiet. A few aunts exchanged knowing
Testa aí,
glances.
moderadores.
I felt the heat of humiliation creeping up
Isabela,
my
obrigada
neck,
pelo hurt
but I
me.
kept my
Tamo
hands
junto,
resting
princesa.
gently in my lap.
Obrigada.
I did not look at Marcus for support because I knew he would
Eu
not
vou,
offer any.
prometo.
Actually, Vivian, I was just promoted to senior internal auditor. I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady and even. It is a highly demanding role, but it is incredibly fulfilling to protect a company's financial integrity. Tyler let out a loud, barking laugh. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the red wine in his crystal glass, looking at me as if I were a naive child who had just shown him a finger painting. Internal auditing, Tyler repeated, shaking his head with a condescending smirk. You make it sound so glamorous, Naomi. Let us be honest here. You are just a glorified hall monitor. You check receipts. You make sure the ink matches the ledger. You are basically counting pennies for the people who are actually building real wealth. Jasmine giggled loudly, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. Tyler, stop being so mean, she teased, though her eyes danced with malice. She is very proud of her little spreadsheets. Tyler did not stop. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany table, addressing the entire room. I am just stating facts, baby. People like Marcus and me, we are in the trenches generating revenue. We take risks. We structure massive equity deals. We move millions of dollars across borders before lunch. We create the wealth. People in Naomi's department just sit in cubicles and complain when somebody misplaces a taxi receipt. It is busy work. It keeps you occupied, but it is not real business. A low chuckle rippled across the table. Several of the older men nodded in agreement. I turned my head slowly to look at my husband, the man I had vowed to love and cherish, the man who had vowed to protect me. Marcus was smiling. He was actually sitting there, swirling his own glass of wine, smiling, as his brother-in-law publicly degraded my entire profession. Tyler is not wrong, babe, Marcus said, shrugging his shoulders as if offering an undeniable truth. You have to admit you accountants can be a bit rigid, always stressing over the rules, always trying to find a problem where there is not one. You lack vision. You do not see the big picture the way we do. That is why I handle the heavy lifting for our future. The betrayal was absolute. It was not just the secret townhouse. It was not just the 26-year-old marketing director with the 4-carat diamond. It was this complete and utter lack of respect. Marcus was willing to throw me to the wolves to let his arrogant brother-in-law humiliate me in front of his entire family just to stroke his own fragile ego. He needed to feel like the king of the castle, even if it meant stepping directly on my neck to boost himself up. I felt a sudden sharp pressure building behind my eyes, the instinctual urge to cry, to defend myself, to shout that I was smarter than every single man sitting at this table. I wanted to scream that Tyler's aggressive equity deals were nothing but reckless gambles, and that Marcus's heavy lifting was currently funding a mistress. I wanted to flip the table and watch their expensive crystal shatter against the marble floor, but I did not. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of roasted garlic and expensive perfume, and I locked my emotions away in a cold, dark box. I looked at Vivian's smug face. I looked at Jasmine's mocking grin. I looked at Tyler's arrogant smirk. And finally, I looked at Marcus. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a small, rigid woman obsessed with rules, incapable of seeing the big picture. They had completely cornered me, stripping away my dignity for their own amusement, absolutely convinced that I would just lower my head and take the abuse like a dutiful, dependent wife. I picked up my fork and knife. I cut a tiny, precise piece of asparagus, placed it in my mouth, and chewed it slowly. I swallowed, dabbed the corners of my mouth with my linen napkin, and smiled directly at Tyler. You know, Tyler, you are absolutely right, I said, my voice smooth as glass. I kept my tone perfectly conversational, offering him a warm, disarming smile. I do look at spreadsheets all day, and it can be incredibly tedious. But the thing about numbers is that they tell a story. They never lie, they never brag, and they never try to project an image they cannot afford. They just reveal the absolute, unfiltered truth about a person. I paused, reaching for my crystal wine glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark Cabernet, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure every single person at that mahogany table was paying attention to me. For example, I continued setting the glass down with a soft clink. Just this past Friday, my department was running a routine compliance check on a series
Gente,
of
eu vou jogar
external
com
vendor disbursements, just counting pennies exactly like you said.
os apoiadores
But we stumbled
agora,
across a
né,
rather
porque
fascinating
eles têm
financial web.
prioridade pra jogar.
It was a network of
Beleza?
undocumented wire
Assim que for
transfers
liberando,
bouncing between
eu libero o
offshore
código de
accounts
equipe.
and local luxury
Beleza?
real estate portfolios. The money was
Isabela,
being
obrigada
funneled
pela
through a
tiara
newly
de
formed shell company, a very quiet, very discreet entity registered under the name Apex Holdings. The
Ué,
reaction was instantaneous,
ué.
and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed in my
Tá
entire
dando?
life.
Pampiquim, o que
Tyler
tá dando?
froze. The smug, arrogant smirk that had been permanently plastered across his face vanished entirely. The silver fork he had been using to point at me slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against his expensive china plate.
menino.
The sound echoed like a gunshot in the suddenly quiet dining room. Next to me, Marcus actually choked. He had been taking a sip of his bourbon, and the mention of
A
Apex
animação do cara é
Holdings
mó
caused him
braba,
to
a
inhale the
minha.
liquor straight into his windpipe. He coughed violently, his chest heaving, his hand flying up to cover his mouth. His face,
Meu
which had
Deus,
been
velho,
glowing
gente,
with
tendo que
arrogant
gastar
pride
os
just
seus
seconds
os
ago,
dados
drained of
móveis.
all color. He looked absolutely ashen,
Só
his
os
eyes
Prime
darting
8.
frantically
Nossa.
toward Tyler in sheer, unadulterated
Verdade,
panic.
né? Os
I did
dois.
not break my polite smile.
Valeu,
I turned my
velho.
head slightly,
Cadê?
looking directly at my husband, as
Peraí.
he struggled to catch his breath. The funniest coincidence, sweetheart, I said,
Aí,
reaching over
coisa
to gently pat
boa.
Marcus on the back. The registered agent listed on the incorporation documents for Apex Holdings
Ó.
shares your exact name, Marcus Jenkins.
Ai,
And the
gente,
primary
sério,
financial
sério,
backer for the shell
sério.
company was listed
Que
as a
tristeza.
private equity fund
Oh.
managed by Sterling Investments.
Que
Jasmine
será que
frowned, her
deu
manicured
pro-
eyebrows pulling together in
pro outro
confusion.
link?
She
Esse
looked
link
at her
que
husband, completely oblivious to the massive legal bomb I had
Normando
just
deu
dropped on
certo?
the table.
Foi só
Tyler
o
is
do bot
not
que não
that your
foi?
firm. Why would Naomi be looking at your accounts? Tyler did not answer her. He could not. The arrogant, wealthy financier who had just spent the last 10 minutes lecturing me about creating real
Isabela,
wealth
gente,
was
a Isabela
suddenly
enviou
struggling to
baú do
formulate a
tesouro
single
com
coherent
20
sentence.
moedinhas aí, hein?
He stared at me,
Quem pega
his
a
blue
moedinha
eyes
ativa
wide
o
with
Hurt
terror,
Me.
a thin
Se
sheen
você
of
não sabe ativar
sweat
o Hurt
suddenly
Me,
breaking
o Hurt
out
Me
across
tá
his forehead.
por
He swallowed hard, his
aqui.
Adam's apple bobbing against the collar of his
Entendeu?
custom-tailored shirt.
Ah,
Where did you see this? Tyler
eu nem sei
demanded.
que lado que é,
His
peraí.
southern drawl was completely gone, replaced by a
Ele tá
sharp,
por aqui,
panicked bark.
entendeu?
What exactly did those
Não
files
foi
say,
porque ela tá
Naomi?
no mobile.
I let out a
e o
soft, dismissive laugh,
Ah,
waving my hand in the exact same condescending
entendi,
manner Vivian had used on me earlier. Oh, Tyler,
Thank you.
you know I cannot
Eu
discuss the
até dei
specifics of an
espaço agora
internal
pra não
corporate
dar mais
audit.
problema, ver se...
We hall monitors are
sei.
incredibly rigid
sei.
about our non-disclosure agreements. We have to follow the rules.
Oxi,
But whoever this Marcus Jenkins
que
is,
foi que
he is making some
cancelou?
incredibly reckless
Nem tinha
rookie
visto.
mistakes. I leaned forward slightly,
Oi,
resting my
Babi,
elbows on the
tudo bem?
table,
Boa noite,
shifting my
seja
gaze between the two
bem-vinda.
terrified men. The compliance software flagged the
Na
transfers because
próxima
the
só dá o
capital was not
espaço,
being used
texto...
for business acquisitions,
Eu
I
dei espaço
explained,
agora, vamos ver que
keeping my
daqui, ele
tone
manda
light
daqui a
as if we were
pouquinho.
discussing the weather.
Aí vocês conferem se foi
Millions of
certo.
dollars were being pushed into a blind
Boa,
trust
eu
to
não vou ser
purchase
líder de
residential
salto
property in
nenhum,
Midtown
entendeu?
Atlanta. All cash transactions. No mortgages, no paper trails.
Tava vendo o
The
vídeo, e
federal
aí?
authorities
Ela
usually
tá vendo,
refer
ela
to
tá
that
vendo,
as
gente.
structuring. It is a textbook money laundering technique.
Oi, Caroline,
Whoever is
tudo
running
bem? Seja
Apex
bem-vinda.
Holdings is essentially begging for an audit from the IRS. And when the federal government starts looking into undocumented cash buys for luxury
Ô, gente,
townhouses,
vocês já
they do not
pararam pra
just take
pensar
your
que a
money,
gente já tá em
they
julho?
take your freedom.
A gente já tá
Pastor
na
Thomas
metade
leaned
do fim
forward,
do ano já,
his
cara.
heavy brow furrowed.
Na metade.
He was a man who
metade.
understood power,
Mano,
and he
tem uma
could
coisa que eu
clearly sense the
fico
massive
animada,
shift in the room's
pra Natal
dynamic,
e Ano Novo,
even if he
meu
did not
Deus.
fully comprehend the financial terminology. Marcus, what is she talking about? Do you have a company called Apex? Marcus was sweating profusely now. The pristine, confident real estate mogul had been reduced to a trembling mess in less than 2
Eu tô
minutes.
no mês do
He
meu
wiped his
aniversário,
mouth with his
quantos
napkin,
anos
avoiding his
vai
father's
fazer?
eyes, avoiding my eyes,
19
looking
é meu
anywhere but at the
aniversário, quero
people sitting at the
presente.
table.
Volta.
It is
Vou te
just
dar
a
uma
coincidence,
live.
Dad. Marcus stammered.
Porra, mano,
His
que
voice was
barulho
high
é
tight,
esse, mano? Tem
lacking all of
pedreiro
its usual booming
passando
authority.
uma
Jenkins is a common
espátula no
last name.
concreto, que porra
There
é
are
essa?
probably a dozen guys named Marcus Jenkins doing real estate
Eu
in
gosto do
Atlanta.
Natal por conta
Naomi is
do
just,
advento.
she is
Falando em
just
advento, quem vai
confused about the
participar?
paperwork. I
Eu não
smiled
sei.
sweetly
Que é
at my
isso?
husband
Que
reaching over
diacho
to
é
adjust the
advento,
collar
meu?
of his shirt.
Eu não sei.
Of course, I agreed
Como assim
cheerfully.
advento?
It must be a
Eu não
coincidence.
sei.
After all, my
O que é isso?
husband
Me
would never be
explica.
foolish
Talvez eu
enough
sei,
to
mas
commit
não
federal
lembro
wire fraud
pelo nome.
and leave a digital
Não
paper
sei.
trail leading straight back to his
Vicky,
brother-in-law. He is far too smart for that.
Vicky, obrigada
Right,
pelo
babe.
hurt me. Tamo
Marcus
junto,
stared
cara.
at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of absolute dread and dawning realization. He was looking at me as if he was seeing me for the very first time. He finally understood that the quiet, dutiful
Meus
woman he
lindos
thought he had successfully
15.
manipulated
Vai fazer
was
festa ou
actually
vai ficar de
holding the keys to
boa?
his
Vai
entire
sair, vai curtir
destruction.
com a família,
He
algo do
realized in that
tipo?
agonizing moment of
Ou vai ter
silence
festão
that I
de
knew
15
exactly
anos?
what he was doing, exactly who he was doing it with, and
Eu
exactly
gosto
where
do
he was
Natal
hiding
por
the
conta...
money.
Ah, tá,
Vivian,
eu já falei, né?
completely oblivious to the
Veio
federal
baú
crimes her
ali.
golden
É
boys
isso,
were
cara.
committing,
Amassou,
clicked her
amassou
tongue
com
in
hurt me.
annoyance. Well, I think that is
Ah, vamos
quite
lá.
enough talk about
É o
spreadsheets
primeiro
and
tempo do
audits at the
ano...
dinner
Não sei
table.
qual
It is
aniversário
ruining the
sábado, especial,
atmosphere.
muita preparação,
Tyler,
alegria,
tell us more about this
expectativas,
anniversary
festas,
trip to
coisas
St. Bart's.
bem, arrependimento
I want to
não.
hear all about the resort.
Gente,
Tyler did
eu não
not
sabia.
respond to his mother-in-law. He pushed his chair back from the table so violently
2 minutos
that the
de
wooden
comercial.
legs scraped
Alguém,
loudly against the
alguém
marble
não,
floor.
Tim.
He
Alguém
stood up,
avisa o Tim, a
abandoning
Tim pra
his
me dar sub.
half-eaten plate of lamb, his hands visibly shaking as he buttoned his suit
Game aqui.
jacket.
Ainda tá falando
I
de
need to make
molho
a
de
call,
hambúrguer.
Tyler said,
não,
his
mano.
voice entirely devoid of its previous
Vontade de comer
arrogant swagger.
hambúrguer agora.
Excuse me. He did not wait for a response. He turned and
Hambúrguer bem
practically sprinted out of the
gostoso, com uma
dining room,
saladinha.
heading straight for the privacy
Pena
of
que
the
aqui na minha
outdoor
casa não tem
terrace.
alface, né?
Jasmine
Ai, é
called
difícil
after
comprar
him, her
alface.
voice
Eu não sei
whining in
vocês.
protest,
Gente,
but he
vocês gostam de
completely
salada?
ignored her.
Ou tipo assim, tem alguma
Marcus
coisa que
stood
vocês não
up
comem?
immediately after
Ah, que
him,
droga,
nearly
mano.
knocking
Onde
over
veio
his
esse
wine
homem?
glass in his haste.
É, certeza.
I should go check on
Eu nem
him.
vi de onde... Ah,
Marcus
tá de-
mumbled, his face
Ah, ele
slick
tá
with
indo pra
panic.
baixo do coisa, mano.
Business
Que
emergency.
merda, vou
I
denunciar
will
essa
be right
merda aí.
back.
Não,
He
já tá
rushed out
pronto,
of
já
the
tá
room,
pronto aí.
chasing after Tyler like a frightened child seeking protection. The dining room fell into a stunned, awkward silence. Pastor Thomas looked deeply troubled, his eyes darting between the empty chairs and me. Vivian looked annoyed that her perfect family dinner had been abruptly derailed. Jasmine was
Sabia.
pouting, crossing her
Mano,
arms
olha
over her
esse
chest, furious that the
cara,
spotlight had been
esse
taken off her
cara.
luxury vacation. I sat comfortably in my chair, feeling an
Ainda bem que
overwhelming
eu tô em
rush
live,
of
né? Que só aquele
pure,
pai mandar
unadulterated
no
power
Pragarena.
coursing
Ana
through
Clara,
my
obrigada pelo
veins.
hurt, me amassou, Santi.
The cage I
Obrigada
had been
pelo
building
hurt,
was
me.
finally
Vocês
snapping
amassaram,
shut,
vocês amassaram.
and the rats were beginning to panic. I picked up my crystal glass, took another slow sip of the Cabernet, and turned to my mother-in-law with a bright, flawless smile. This lamb is absolutely delicious, Vivian, I said. You must give me the recipe. I did not stay for dessert. I politely informed Vivian that I had an early morning compliance meeting, kissed the air near her powdered cheek, and ordered a premium rideshare back to Buckhead. Marcus was still locked inside Tyler's private study dealing with his sudden business emergency. I let him sweat. He was exactly where I wanted him, trapped in a cage of his own making, terrified of the lock. The moment I stepped inside my dark, silent house, the dutiful wife persona melted away completely. I walked straight down the hall to my home office, locked the heavy door behind me, and booted up my custom-built desktop array. 3 massive monitors flared to life, casting a cold blue glow across the room. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out the encrypted flash drive I had extracted from Chloe's computer, and plugged it into my secure network hub. I poured myself a glass of cold water, sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to hunt. Forensic accounting is not just about crunching numbers. It is about understanding human behavior. Greedy people are inherently lazy. They take shortcuts. They use the same passwords for multiple accounts. They leave digital footprints across unsecured networks. And they love to show off. Marcus was no exception. By analyzing the cloned data from Chloe's marketing laptop, I found exactly what I was looking for. Marcus had logged into his personal wealth management portal from her computer to show her the deed to the townhouse. And in his arrogant haste, he had clicked the box to keep his session active. I bypassed the initial firewall and dropped straight into the belly of the beast. The financial web they had spun was intricate, but to a trained eye, it read like a glowing neon map. Tyler was
Tudo
managing
bom?
a massive
Como que
private
vocês estão
equity
aí,
fund at
rapaziada?
Sterling
Sejam bem-vindos,
Investments,
galera nova.
pooling capital from wealthy
Galera que
church
é antiga
members,
também, seja muito
local
bem-vinda.
politicians, and Atlanta's
Voltei a
elite.
fazer live faz
But Tyler was not
2 dias,
investing all
hein,
of
aqui
it. He was
no
skimming heavy
TikTok.
percentages off the top. To clean the stolen money,
Fecha esse
Tyler needed a local
TikTok!
washing machine. Enter Marcus.
Gente,
Marcus created
infelizmente eu não
Apex
posso fazer
Holdings
nada.
as an anonymous shell
Vou ter que dar
corporation.
sub. Vou ter que dar sub.
Tyler would authorize massive
Voltou.
payouts from the
Opa!
equity fund to Apex
Fecha esse
Holdings,
quiosque!
classifying them as real estate consulting fees and property acquisition costs.
Gente, não
Marcus
dá,
would then
mano.
take those illicit funds, falsify property development
Wendell,
invoices,
obrigada pelo
and
Hurt
push
Me.
the
Seja
clean
muito
cash
bem-vinda ou
back into the
bem-vindo.
legitimate economy. In exchange for washing the money,
Enfim,
Marcus
gente,
took a
voltando
hefty
lá.
cut. He
Tava
used his
falando?
cut to live like a king,
Daí
lease
você provavelmente
expensive
leu
cars,
esse daí eu já
and buy an
respondi, né? Não sei se ela
$800,000
viu,
townhouse
achei.
in cash for his 26-year-old mistress.
Mas
It was a
enfim,
textbook money laundering
eu gosto
operation
mais
fueled
de
by
salada.
Tyler's
O
corporate
que eu gosto de
access
salada?
and
Gente,
Marcus's real estate license.
eu,
10 miles
deixa eu pegar.
away in the
Eu
lavish study of
odiava
the Jenkins estate,
pimentão,
I knew
cebola, essas
exactly
coisas,
what was
sabe?
happening.
Hoje em dia,
I could
eu
easily
amo.
picture the scene.
Amo, amo, amo.
Marcus was pacing the
Mas é
hardwood
porque eu,
floor.
porque eu
His
comecei a
silk
gostar
tie
de
loosened his
vinagrete.
hands,
Aí eu
trembling,
comecei a
as
gostar
he
mais.
tried to explain
Mas de
how his wife
alface,
knew about their secret
gente, eu prefiro
corporation.
muito mais
Tyler
alface
was likely
americano.
pouring himself a
Alface
stiff
americano é
drink.
tudo, né?
His pale face flushed with
Nossa, que
rage,
delícia.
realizing that his entire
Eu amo
pristine Wall
salada.
Street
Pois é, eu
career
comecei a
was
gostar
currently
agora.
dangling by a thread held by a woman he had
Aliás,
just publicly
o que
mocked.
você achou do
Tyler was
vídeo?
arrogant,
Gostou?
but he was
Gostou?
not stupid. He knew that if an internal
Couve é
auditor
top,
at a major
couve
firm had
também.
flagged
Mas eu
Apex
gosto mais de
Holdings,
suco.
the
Suco
digital
de
trail was
couve.
already
Minha mãe
bleeding.
faz suco de... Nossa, minha
He
mãe
knew
faz
he had
suco
to
muito
sever
bom
the
de couve.
connection between Sterling
O famoso
Investments
suco
and the shell company
detox.
immediately. He had to burn the
Ai,
offshore
suco
ledgers,
verde.
delete the wire transfer histories, and wipe the cloud servers clean before Monday morning.
Alface com azeite
Back in my home
e
office, an alert
sal,
flashed
coisa
across my
boa.
center monitor.
Pois
A
é,
sudden
gente.
massive spike in server traffic
A
was
primeira
coming from the
eu não
primary
gostava
Apex
tanto.
Holdings
Mas agora,
database, hosted on a
nossa,
secure
como
server in
até
the Cayman
pimentão.
Islands.
Pimentão verde, pimentão
Tyler had
amarelo,
logged
pimentão
in.
vermelho.
He was initiating a
Nunca
remote wipe
imaginei na minha
protocol.
vida
My
que
heart
eu
slammed
estaria
against my
comendo essas
ribs.
coisas.
The
Mas eu comecei a
adrenaline hit
gostar a
my
partir
bloodstream like
ali dos
ice
30,
water.
né?
This was the
Porque
defining
antes, meu
moment.
Deus,
If Tyler
o paladar da
successfully
gata
purged
não
those
era
offshore servers before I could
daqueles,
download the
né?
master ledgers, my entire case would
Gosto
become
de couve na
circumstantial.
manteiga.
I would have pieces of the
Olha,
puzzle, but I would lose the smoking gun
couve
that
já me
tied
lembra
Tyler's investor
feijoada.
fraud
Por
directly to
quê?
Marcus's real estate transactions. I did
Gente,
not
eu ainda
panic.
tô na
I
saga
leaned
de
forward, my
fazer
fingers flying
feijão
across
pela
the
primeira
mechanical
vez
keyboard
na
with
minha casa.
practiced, ruthless
Que eu
precision.
nunca fiz feijão.
I opened a backdoor
Eu já falei
directory
pra vocês
using
da
the
saga que eu
cached
tenho
credentials from
medo da
Chloe's
panela de pressão.
computer. I
Pois é,
bypassed the
pois é.
user interface entirely
Esse medo
and
ainda não
pinged
foi
the
embora.
server's root directory.
Aí minha
A
mãe,
progress bar
como eu sou
appeared on
vizinha
my
da minha
left
mãe, né?
screen.
Minha mãe vem a vizinha, ela faz
Tyler's wipe
feijão e
protocol
ela
was
traz,
initializing.
ela traz feijão aqui pra mim.
10% deleted,
Eu compro
20%.
feijão e dou pra
He was
ela.
dumping the transaction
Pois é,
histories
tinha
first.
paladar
I
infantil, cara.
targeted the master financial statements, the
Tem
PDF wire
primo
transfer
do Fernando,
receipts,
gente,
and
meu
the digital
Deus, ele tem
signatures
12
linking
anos.
Tyler and Marcus
Cara,
to the
o
holding
menino não come
company.
quase nada, cara.
I
Nada,
initiated a
nada,
mass
nada
extraction
diferente.
protocol.
Não gosta de
A
um
second
mousse de
progress bar
maracujá, de um...
appeared
Ele
on
só
my
come
right
coisa de...
screen.
Ou é bolo de
Downloading.
chocolate, ele não come nenhum
15%,
outro bolo. Tem que ser
30%.
bolo de chocolate.
It was a dead
Ou de
sprint
sobremesa,
through
aquele
cyberspace.
danoninho
Tyler was
que
burning the
faz
bridge while I was desperately trying to
com leite
carry the gold across
condensado,
it.
creme de leite, o suco de
45%
morango.
deleted,
Mano,
50%
isso não come
downloaded.
nada.
The cooling fans
Salsicha,
inside my computer
cachorro-quente,
tower
ele não
roared to
come no
life,
pão
fighting to
com
keep
a
up with the
vina e
massive
tal,
data
usa
transfer.
salsicha e coloca as
I stared at the dual
coisinhas, batata
progress
palha.
bars, my
Não,
eyes
ele tem,
unblinking
ele
my
come
breathing
a
perfectly
salsicha
still in the
pura,
quiet
só
room.
salsicha. Ele não
Come
come.
on, give me the
Gente, sério,
receipts.
não dá.
Give me the
Não dá.
proof. 70%
Uma
deleted.
coisa boa que eu acho
Tyler
que
was
ele,
moving
que ele faz
fast,
é ele não toma
executing batch
refrigerante.
purges
Ele
on
não
the
toma
server.
refrigerante por
80%
nada.
downloaded.
Ele
I was
só
pulling the
toma
deed to
suco.
Chloe's townhouse, the offshore banking routing numbers, and the forged consulting invoices. 90%
Verdade. Por
deleted.
isso que eu meti
The server
salsicha
connection
depois,
began to
Wesley. Porque tem gente que não
destabilize.
sabe o que é Bina,
Tyler
né?
was shutting down the
Rapaziada,
host
não sei se vocês
network.
sabem o que é Bina.
95%
Tem gente
downloaded.
que não é do sul,
The
né? Nem
screen
sabe o que é
flickered.
Bina.
A
Bina
red
é
error
a
message
salsicha que
flashed
vai no
across the terminal
cachorro-quente.
window. Connection terminated by
É muito
remote
engraçado
host.
quando a gente viaja
Tyler
pra
had
fora.
pulled the
Pra
plug.
fora não, tipo,
The
pra outro
Cayman
estado.
server went
Aí
completely
pede
dark.
cachorro-quente.
I sat
Ah, me
back
vê
in my
tuas
leather
Binas.
chair, the silence
Cachorro-quente
of the
com
home
duas
office
Binas.
rushing back in to
Porra,
fill
é
my
Bina, tá
ears.
ligado?
I slowly moved my
Pois é,
mouse over to the
Menina,
secure
essa
folder
assiste
on my encrypted hard drive. I clicked the Properties tab.
couve refogada,
Data
farofa,
size,
laranja
4.2
vinagrete.
gigabytes.
Vou falar pra vocês que
Status,
não gosto de farofa.
download complete. I let out a slow, deeply satisfying breath.
Me julguem.
I had
Me
beaten
julguem.
him by a
Eu não gosto de
fraction of a
farofa,
second.
gente.
I clicked open the folder and scrolled
sei
through
por quê.
thousands
Não
of
sei.
pristine, high-resolution PDF documents. Every single wire transfer, every fake invoice, every hidden asset. I had the
Adeus.
entire history of their criminal enterprise locked safely on my local drive. Tyler thought he had destroyed the evidence, completely unaware
O
that a
Brasil todo
copy of
fala
his
salsicha,
federal
só o
indictment
sul que quer
was
inventar.
now sitting on the desk of the
Mano,
woman he had called a
eu já tinha
glorified hall
pesquisado uma
monitor.
vez por
I
que
backed up the
Vina,
folder to 3
mas eu já
separate
esqueci.
offline hard
Já
drives,
esqueci,
locked them in
já
my
fugiu
fireproof
da
floor
mente.
safe, and shut down my computer. The forensic
Sempre
deep
isso,
dive was
mano,
over. The
sempre
trap
isso,
was
Liz.
set.
Ai.
All I had to do now was wait for the rats to realize there was no way out. I walked out
Da
of the
onde
home
que é
office
Vina,
and headed
Wesley?
straight for the
Você que é mais
kitchen.
dos
I poured
conhecimentos
myself a fresh
gerais.
glass of water, feeling the cool condensation against my palm, and carried it into the formal living room. I sat on the center of our pristine white sofa and placed exactly 3 printed sheets of paper on the glass coffee table. I did not print the entire 4 gigabytes of
Veio dos
evidence.
alemães.
That
Dos
would be showing my
alemão.
entire hand. I only needed him to see the highlights. Page 1 was the incorporation document for Apex Holdings listing his name. Page 2 was a wire transfer from Sterling Investments for
É a mesma coisa da
$800,000.
Gillette.
Page 3 was the deed to Chloe's Midtown townhouse purchased in cash. I waited in the dark for 45 minutes before I heard the heavy thud of the front door opening. Marcus walked into the foyer. He looked completely disheveled. His expensive suit jacket was slung over his shoulder. His tie was ripped off, and the top 3 buttons of his shirt were undone.
Vocês
He
sabem
was
o
breathing
que
heavily,
é
muttering
chineque?
something under his breath as he
Galera,
tossed
não
his
sei se é
keys
uma
onto the
coisa
console
daqui
table.
também.
He
Chineque é o
froze when he saw me
famoso
sitting in
pão
the dim
doce.
light of the living room.
Falcão, obrigada pelo
Naomi, he
hurt
breathed
me.
out, trying to instantly
Chineque é aquele
reconstruct his
famosinho
suave
pão
persona.
com doce.
What are you
Tem
doing
tipo
sitting in the
doce, às
dark?
vezes coco
I reached
ralado
over
por
and switched on the
cima,
table
uma
lamp.
cerejinha e
The
tal.
sudden light illuminated
Salve,
the 3
mídia.
pieces of
Tranquilo,
paper
mano?
resting
Seja
on the glass
bem-vindo.
table between us. I am just reviewing some recent real
tipo,
estate
no
acquisitions,
Maranhão, quando
I
eu fui
said
pra lá,
calmly.
o pessoal
Marcus
fala,
stepped into the room, his
pão
eyes
de massa
immediately
doce,
locking
pão,
onto the
massa
documents.
fina. Não.
I watched his throat work as
tipo,
he
pão de
swallowed hard.
leite. Vocês falam pão
He
de
walked
leite,
slowly
porque,
toward the
tipo, no
table,
Maranhão,
stopping just on the
eles
other
falam
side
pão
of
de
it.
massa fina.
He did not pick up the papers. He did not need
Mano, pelo
to.
amor de Deus.
He recognized the letterhead
Como que eu
immediately.
errei isso? Como eu errei
What is
isso?
this? He asked. His voice was low-laced with a dangerous edge I had rarely heard before. That is an $800,000 question, I replied, crossing my legs and leaning back into the sofa. I was
então
hoping you could explain it to me. How
massa
exactly
fina,
does a real
massa
estate
grossa e pão
broker with
doce,
our
pois
current
é.
debt-to-income ratio
Pois é,
manage
uma
to
vez eu
buy
fui
a
no mercado,
midtown townhouse in
me vê pão de
cash
leite.
for a 26-year-old marketing director? For a
Era
split
massa
second,
fina, pão de
Marcus
massa
looked like a
fina.
deer caught in the headlights. But Marcus was a salesman. His entire career was based on selling
Opa,
fictions to
mídia.
people
No momento eu
and
tô jogando com a
convincing
galerinha
them
aqui
it
que
was their
é
dream.
sub
The
da
panic
live,
vanished quickly,
e aí-
replaced by a cold,
Aí
calculating
normalmente libera o
anger.
código de equipe.
He dropped his suit jacket onto
Aí,
a
se
chair
você
and
for
took a step
rápido,
closer to me,
suficiente,
deliberately
você
entering my
entra aí.
personal space. You went digging through my private files, Marcus stated, completely ignoring my question. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, using his physical size to tower over me. You violated my privacy and stole confidential client information. Confidential client information? I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. Are we calling your mistress a
cueca
client
virada,
now?
mentira.
Is that how you
A cueca virada
categorize the
daqui também?
jewelry and the
Não
real
tem
estate
outros
on your
lugares
tax
que,
returns?
Tipo, deve ter, mas é
Marcus
outra,
took
outro
another
nome?
step forward. He
Rapaziada,
was so close now
vocês
that
comem
his
cueca
knees were nearly
virada?
touching the glass table. He glared
possível.
down at me, his eyes dark and menacing.
Tem aqui
You need
sim.
to stop talking, Naomi. You are having a mental breakdown.
mano, pelo amor
You
de
have been working 50-hour weeks at
Gente, eu
this
tô
new
muito
job,
ruim, meu Deus.
and the
Os caras
stress
ficam em
is
cima de
making you
mim,
paranoid.
telando.
You are seeing things that are not there. I looked up at him, entirely unfazed by his
Só
attempt
peguei a
at
masculina
intimidation.
feia.
I am seeing a deed with your signature on it, Marcus. I am seeing a wire transfer from your brother-in-law's equity fund. The math is not paranoid. The math is highly illegal. He let out a loud, mocking sigh,
Gente,
running a
eu falo pra
hand over
vocês
his
qual vai ser
face
o
as if I
próximo
were an
jogo com as
exhausting, irrational
garotas.
child.
Se
Listen
vocês
to
estão com
yourself.
saudade das garotas,
He scoffed, shaking his
o nosso
head.
próximo jogo
You sound
vai
absolutely
ser
crazy right now.
FIFA.
This
Né,
is
FIFA,
exactly
né?
what Vivian was
ciclar
talking
futebol.
about at dinner.
De futebol.
You are so obsessed
A
with
gente
your
vai jogar
little
futebol.
spreadsheets that you have completely lost touch with reality. Apex Holdings is a legitimate holding company used to protect
Mano, minha
high
caixinha
net
de-
worth clients. Chloe is a client. I helped her secure a property through a private trust to protect her privacy. That is it.
Desse daí,
That is
entendeu?
the whole big
A gente vai jogar.
conspiracy. The gaslighting was so
Quando?
textbook it
Então,
was
tô
almost
esperando a
insulting.
bonita decidir o
He was
dia,
actually
né?
trying
Era
to
pra ser na
convince me that
semana.
buying a house for the woman who kept his framed photograph on her
EA
desk
Sports
was just standard business
2026.
practice.
É, porque a gente gosta
She
de
is
chamar
wearing
de
a
FIFA, né?
4-carat diamond ring, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level.
Mas é esse daí
She told me
mesmo.
she is marrying you in
Vocês
6
vão ver
months.
só as craques.
Marcus threw his head back and
O
laughed.
bom que a gente
It was
só
a cruel
escolhe
booming
jogo que a gente
sound
não
designed to
sabe
make me
jogar,
feel
coisa boa,
small.
né?
Oh, I get it now,
Maravilha.
he said, his lips twisting into
Isso é
a
bom.
malicious grin. This is not about the money at all. This is about jealousy. You saw some silly young girl with a crush and your insecurities went into overdrive. Look at you, Naomi. You are practically vibrating with bitterness. You are so threatened by a 26-year-old that you hacked into my business files to try and frame me for a federal crime. He leaned down, placing his hands flat on the glass table, bringing his face mere inches from mine. His
Plugin pra
cologne
emular o
mixed with the smell of
controle.
stale sweat and fear.
Deus.
Let
Mas-
me explain how the real world
Mas
works,
dá pra jogar
he
pelo teclado
whispered,
do
his
PC?
tone dripping
Não,
with venom.
teclado e...
Nobody is going to believe
teclado
you.
e
Do you
mouse?
hear me?
Ou é só
Nobody.
teclado?
I did not break
Eu
eye
tenho
contact.
controle, né? Vou
I did
arrumar
not
meu
flinch.
controle.
Who do you think you are? Marcus continued, his voice rising in volume and arrogance. You are an auditor, a nobody. You sit in a cubicle. I am Marcus Jenkins. My father built half the community centers in this city. My family brings in millions of dollars in donations every single year. The mayor comes to our Thanksgiving dinners.
Ah, mano,
The chief
cadê?
of police
Ah,
plays
tá
golf
em
with my
cima da
dad.
casa?
You think anyone in Atlanta is
Em
going to
cima,
take
tem
the
em
word
cima,
of a
tem em cima,
jealous,
mano,
bitter
cuidado.
wife over a pillar of the Jenkins
Em cima,
family?
Xandão.
He pointed a finger directly at
Tô
my
avisando.
face.
Deve ter em cima.
They will say you lost your mind because you could not give me
Ah.
children. They will say you fabricated
Achei que
these
era de
documents
cima.
because I was preparing to file for divorce. By the time my family's lawyers are done with you, you will not even be able to get a job checking receipts at a grocery
sim,
store.
é que depende
He
do
stood back
controle,
up,
caso
straightening
seja
his
algum
posture,
genérico,
projecting
por
the
exemplo.
absolute confidence of a man who
Precisa
believed he
emulá-lo.
was entirely
Pode ser, mas-
untouchable.
Ah, tá.
You are going to take
Eu vou
these
jogar no
fake
meu
documents,
controle do
Marcus
Xbox,
commanded, gesturing
que eu
to the
baixei
table.
pelo-
You are going to put them in the
Game Pass.
shredder. You are going to apologize to me for invading my
Vai ser
privacy.
engraçado. A
And
gente vai
then
ter mais
you are
uma
going to march
garota
into your
nova
office
aqui,
tomorrow
que
and quit your job.
talvez a galera
Because clearly you are not
conheça, quem já
mentally
assistiu
stable enough
Arcanis
to
aí,
handle the
acompanhou
workload.
Arcanis,
I sat there in
é a nossa
silence, absorbing the
robozinha,
full weight
a
of his
Eva.
psychological warfare. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to cry, to apologize, to doubt my own sanity. He was using every
Beleza.
toxic tool in his arsenal, leveraging his
E falando
family's
nisso, eu vi
powerful
sua mensagem
reputation
que
to crush my
eu tenho que
spirit.
treinar, né, pro futebol.
He
Gente,
honestly believed that
quarta-feira-
his last name was a
quarta-feira?
magical
Não,
shield
16,
that could
é isso.
deflect federal law.
Quarta-feira,
I
gente.
reached out and slowly picked
Tem
up the 3
jogo,
pieces
né?
of paper from the coffee
No
table.
Roblox.
I tapped the edges against the glass, evening
México
them
contra
out into a
Colômbia.
perfect, orderly
Então, assim, vou ter
stack.
que treinar um pouquinho,
Psychological warfare
Vou ter que
only
treinar.
works if the victim actually doubts their own reality.
né? Vou logo entrar lá
I
no
did not
Discord, chamar
doubt a
as cria-
single
as
comma
crianças pra
on
me
those
ajudar.
spreadsheets. I knew exactly what I held in my hands. I looked up at my husband, the man who was currently plotting to destroy my reputation to save his own skin. I offered him a calm, chilling smile. Okay, Marcus, I said softly. I stood up, holding the papers against my chest. You are absolutely right. The stress must be getting to me. I will take care of these right now. I walked past him, feeling his triumphant gaze on my back.
Ai,
He
já
thought he
acabou,
had
eu tô-
won. He thought he had
Gente,
successfully
eu tava com a
terrified
cabeça em
me
outro
into
lugar.
submission. He had no idea that I was just
com a
preserving
cabeça em
my
outro lugar
energy for the
pensando
real war
nisso.
that was about to begin. I had barely taken 5 steps
mal.
down the hallway toward the kitchen
mal.
when the heavy oak front door flew open with a violent crash. The solid wood slammed against the drywall, shaking the
Vão querer
framed
mais?
artwork in
Vão
the
querer
foyer.
mais? Alguém
The
vai sair?
booming,
Vamos
heavy
ficar?
footsteps of Pastor
Bora, então
Thomas
bora.
Jenkins echoed across the marble
Aí na
floor,
próxima eu vou liberar o
followed
código de equipe pra
instantly by the
quem
sharp,
tá no-
rapid
na live
clicking
jogar,
of
se
Vivian's
quiserem, tá?
designer heels.
Então fiquem...
They had not even
Fiquem
bothered to
espertos.
ring the doorbell. They had used their emergency key. They must have driven straight from their sprawling estate in absolute panic,
Opa,
likely tipped
sério?
off by a frantic phone call from
Gente, não
Tyler the
acredito, deixa eu
moment
ver.
he fled the dining room. Marcus spun around, his chest heaving. Dad, he started, holding his hands up defensively. I have it under control.
Ué,
You clearly do not have a single thing
foi
under
aprovado,
control,
mas aqui não foi.
Marcus. Pastor Thomas bellowed.
Ok, deixa eu ver.
His booming baritone, the exact same voice that commanded crowds of thousands every Sunday morning, was now laced with absolute fury. Tyler is having a panic attack in my driveway. He is rambling about compliance algorithms and shell companies. What exactly is going on in this house? I stopped walking. I turned around, still clutching the printed bank statements tightly against my chest. For one brief, incredibly naive second, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. I looked at the pastor, a man who preached about integrity, fidelity, and the sacred sanctity of marriage. I looked at Vivian, a woman who led the church's marriage counseling ministry. I honestly thought they were here to enact righteous fury on their sinful son. I thought they were here to hold him accountable for destroying our vows. Marcus is having an affair, I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady in the large echoing foyer. I stepped back into the living room facing my in-laws. He has been sleeping with a 26-year-old marketing director from my company. And he just used Tyler's investment fund to buy her an $800,000 townhouse in cash. I braced myself for the shock. I waited for Vivian to gasp, for Thomas to raise his hands in holy indignation, for them to demand that Marcus fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Instead, the room fell completely, chillingly silent. Pastor Thomas did not gasp. He did not look at me with sympathy. He slowly turned his massive, imposing frame toward his son. His face was not filled with righteous anger over the adultery. It was filled with sheer annoyance. I specifically told you to be discreet, Marcus. Pastor Thomas said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. I warned you about leaving a paper trail. If you are going to step outside of your marriage, you do it quietly, and you certainly do not use a federal wire transfer to buy the girl a house in the middle of the city. The air evaporated from my lungs. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at the man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday. I looked at Vivian, who was currently adjusting her pearl necklace with an expression of mild irritation, as if Marcus had simply spilled red wine on a white rug. You knew, I whispered, the horrifying realization crashing down on me like a physical weight. You knew he was cheating on me. Vivian let out a long, dramatic sigh. She glided past her husband, her silk dress rustling against the floor, and stopped a few feet in front of me. She looked me up and down with absolute disdain. "Oh, Naomi, please stop being so incredibly dramatic," Vivian sneered. She crossed her arms over her chest. Of course we knew Marcus had a little distraction on the side. He is a young, handsome, wealthy man. Did you honestly expect him to stay entirely faithful to a woman who spends more time looking at spreadsheets than taking care of her husband? I was paralyzed. I could not move a single muscle. The sheer, unadulterated evil radiating from this woman was paralyzing. Pastor Thomas stepped forward, placing a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight, a silent physical threat masked as fatherly comfort. He looked down at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Listen to me very carefully," Naomi Thomas said, utilizing his smooth, persuasive pastoral cadence. "Men who carry the weight of empires have certain pressures. Marcus is out there building the community. He brings millions of dollars into our church. He provides employment. He carries the Jenkins legacy on his back. A man of that stature, a man with that much power, requires a release valve. This girl, this Chloe, she is just a temporary extracurricular activity. She means absolutely nothing." I shoved his hand off my shoulder, stepping back as if his touch had physically burned me. "Extracurricular activity." I repeated, my voice shaking with a mixture of absolute disgust and rage. He bought her a house. He bought her a 4-carat diamond ring. He promised to marry her in the winter. "Words are cheap, Naomi," Vivian interjected, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with her husband. "Men say whatever they need to say to keep their playthings happy. But you are the one standing in the Buckhead mansion. You are the one with the Jenkins last name. You are the wife. You have the status, the security, and the respect of the entire community. Why on earth are you trying to burn your own house down over a meaningless fling?" I looked at the three of them standing together. Marcus, Vivian, and Thomas. The holy trinity of hypocrisy. They were a perfectly unified front of moral bankruptcy. It was not just Marcus who was corrupt. The rot went all the way down to the foundation. This entire family was a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of religious salvation.
Luana.
You are asking me to turn a blind eye to wire fraud and adultery so you can keep up appearances, I stated, my
Eu
voice
não sei quem é
dropping to an
Luana.
icy
É que
whisper.
ela fica na live da
You want me to
roxinha,
play
ó.
the dutiful,
Silva,
oblivious
Laud
wife
Silva,
while your
obrigado
son
pelo
risks
hurt, tamo
federal
junto, cara.
prison? Thomas
Peraí que já-
narrowed his eyes, his
Ô, droga,
pastoral
essa aqui
charm
foi
vanishing
triste, gente.
entirely.
Essa partida foi
I am
triste.
not asking
Menos
you,
17
Naomi.
pontos, não.
I
Não
am
aceito.
telling you.
Não aceito. Eu
You are
tava quase
going to
saindo do
keep your
Platina
mouth
3.
shut. You are going to
Sendo-
take
sendo
whatever
carregada, né?
documents you
Sendo
stole from
carregada.
Tyler's company, and you are going to destroy them tonight.
Gente,
You
eu
are
vou
going
liberar
to
o código
walk
de
into
equipe
your
pra
new
galerinha
corporate job
jogar comigo, aí
tomorrow,
depois a gente
and you are
volta
going
em
to
uma
treat that marketing
squadzinha
girl with
da
nothing
gente.
but absolute respect. You will not disrupt the flow of
Código
capital
de
in this
equipe,
family.
rapaziada, pra
Do you
jogar.
understand me? The sheer audacity of his demands made my blood boil.
1, 2,
He
3,
honestly
5,
believed he
4,
could
9,
order me to
3.
become an accessory to a federal crime just because he commanded a congregation.
Gente, eu sei que tá
Vivian
bem
stepped
óbvio a força
closer,
aqui, mas
her expensive
você
perfume
aposta
suffocating me.
em que
Do not
pra
act
entrar
so
pras
high
quartas
and
de
mighty,
finais,
Naomi.
Argentina
You
ou
think you are the
Egito?
first woman to deal with
Ah,
this.
mano.
I have
E
turned a
aí,
blind
chat, o
eye
que
to
vocês
Thomas's
acham?
indiscretions for 30 years. That is the price of the crown.
Complicated,
You
né?
endure the private
Complicated.
humiliation to maintain the public power. You think we got this estate, those cars, and our influence by throwing tantrums every time our men stepped out of line?
Ainda bem
You
que eu
swallow
entendi
your
que você
pride, you secure the bag, and you protect the family name.
tem.
That
Quer
is
ver?
how a smart woman survives. I
Argentina
stared
vai
at
ser
my
eliminada
mother-in-law,
amanhã?
realizing
Meu
the
Deus.
absolute tragedy of her existence. She
Todo
had
mundo em
traded her
oração na
entire
madrugada,
soul
hein?
for a silk
3 horas
dress
da madrugada.
and a front
Ô,
row
gente, deixa eu perguntar
pew.
pra vocês. Vocês
She had
gostam
swallowed
de
her dignity
Supernatural?
so many times that she had become
Gente, tipo
completely
assim,
hollow inside.
É, eu já tinha
And
assistido
now
alguns
she expected
episódios
me
bem
to do the
avulsos,
exact
assim,
same
porque meu irmão
thing.
assistia.
She expected me to
E
lay down
agora
on the
que eu
altar of
parei
the
pra
Jenkins
sentar
family
assim, e
ego
tipo, eu e
and
Fernando estamos
sacrifice my
assistindo. A
own
gente tá na
sanity to
segunda
protect their
temporada.
dirty money. They were
Agora
looking at
começamos
me
a terceira
expectantly.
temporada,
They were
gente.
waiting for me to break to nod my head to
Nunca
submit to
assisti.
their twisted
Mano,
patriarchal
é muito
authority.
legal. Eu não sei se você gosta,
They
assim,
thought they
de
had me
coisas de
completely
terror, coisas
surrounded.
assombradas, demônios e
They
tudo
thought my
mais.
middle class upbringing made me
Mas se
weak,
você
that I would
gostar
be
de uma
so
pegada
terrified
assim...
of losing my wealthy lifestyle that I would fall in line like an obedient little
tipo assim, não é,
soldier.
meu
I
Deus,
looked
super
down at
gosto,
the
mas a
printed
gente
bank
assiste
statement
e a
still
gente acaba
clutched in my
gostando.
hands. I looked
Nunca
back up at
vi,
Pastor
gente,
Thomas,
eu também
feeling a
nunca tinha parado
terrifying,
pra ver.
absolute
Mas
calm
eu e o
wash
Fernando, a
over
gente
my
gosta de assistir
entire
série
body.
juntos.
The
Então,
ultimate
a
betrayal
gente
had
pegou
just
pra
granted me
assistir.
the ultimate
Tá
liberation.
muito
I no
legal.
longer felt
Muito
a
legal
single
estar
ounce
agora na
of guilt for
terceira
what I was
temporada.
about to do to them.
Tem umas
They
4
were
vezes
not
as
my
15
family.
temporadas.
They were my
Nossa,
targets.
sabe o que me
I took
alivia,
a slow,
Lua?
deep breath.
Que tem muita
I
temporada
smoothed
pra
my
assistir.
expression into a mask of perfect
Alô, alô,
defeated
tudo bem?
submission.
Opa, tô ouvindo agora
I
sim.
let my shoulders
Ô,
slump
você já
forward,
assistiu
projecting the
Game
exact
of
image of a
Thrones?
broken,
Game of Thrones
intimidated woman
assisti.
that they
Tudo.
desperately
Muito
needed
foda,
to
né?
see.
Muito foda.
You are right,
Muito foda. Tirando o
E-
I
final, foi um
whispered,
pouquinho
forcing my
bosta, né?
voice
Mas
to
tá tudo
sound
certo.
shaky and
É
fragile.
verdade. E a Casa do
I am
Dragão?
just so
Não, não
overwhelmed.
assisti
I did not
ainda.
understand how
Muito bom
things
também.
worked.
Que se
Marcus let out a
passa
loud,
200
heavy
anos
sigh of
antes
relief, instantly
Antes de Game
stepping
of
forward to
Thrones?
wrap his arms
É,
around me.
muito
See,
foda,
Dad,
véi. Muito
Marcus
legal.
said,
foda.
pulling me against his chest.
God é foda.
I told you she just needed to calm down. Naomi is smart.
Cara,
She knows what is best for
eu,
us.
eu tenho um
Vivian
bonequinho
smiled a
de
cold,
Game of
victorious
Thrones.
smirk spreading
É
across her
o-
heavily
é o
made
Ned
up face.
Stark.
That is a good
Assista-
girl,
assista
Vivian
a
said,
Casa
her
do
tone
Dragão. É
dripping
muito
with
bom.
venomous
Vou colocar
satisfaction.
essa
I
pra
knew you
gente
would see
assistir
reason once
também
you
aqui.
calmed down. I rested my head
Tenho medo
against
de
Marcus's shoulder,
assistir.
staring
tipo assim,
blankly
não
at the
recomendo
beige
se
wall
você tem
behind
medo.
him.
Às vezes eu tenho um cagaço,
I
aí eu
let
não
them
assisto de
believe they
noite.
had won.
Mas
I
se
let them
você
believe
tem
they had
medo,
successfully crushed my
assiste de
spirit.
manhã, mais cedo.
Because a cornered
Você vai
animal
entender
is
como é que,
dangerous,
tipo,
but a dead one is
como
invisible.
é que se passou, tá
And I
ligado?
needed
Antes
to be
de-
completely invisible for the
de
next
Game of
phase of my
Thrones.
plan. Marcus stroked my
Vou
hair,
assistir.
his
Falaram
heavy
muito
hand
bem.
resting on
Todo
the
mundo
back
fala
of
muito
my
bem
neck in a
da-
gesture that
A
was
Casa
meant
do
to be
Dragão é boa
comforting,
também. É,
but
todo
felt
mundo fala muito
entirely
bem.
possessive. He genuinely believed his father's booming
A
voice
primeira
and
and
temporada
his
que dá
mother's
me-
vicious lecture
que
had
dá medo, mas
successfully
depois disso é
broken me.
suave.
He
Pois
thought
é,
I was
cara, eu
just
fiquei
another weak link in
louca
the
nessa
Jenkins family
segunda
chain, ready to
temporada.
be hammered
Mano,
into
sabe
compliance. Vivian,
quem me
however,
irrita
was
muito?
not
O Sub.
satisfied with just
Cara,
verbal
o Sub
submission.
me irrita pra
She needed
caramba, porque ele é
absolute,
meio
tangible control.
tonto, é uma
She needed
porta,
to know
cara.
that my brief
Quando
rebellion was
o Jim
permanently
fala pra ele
extinguished.
ficar com alguém pra,
I listened to
pra
the
cuidar
sharp
da
click
pessoa,
of the
eu falo,
gold
pô,
clasp
mas
on
deixa eu
Vivian's
mais
designer handbag.
animal
She
pra
reached
cuidar.
inside and pulled out out a leather-bound checkbook. The crisp rustle of
Ai,
the
que
thick
ódio.
paper filled the quiet living room. She uncapped a heavy
Fala
gold
sério,
fountain
estamos
pen and
falando de
began to write the nib, scratching
Supernatural.
violently against the
Yes.
paper. We are
Que
going to
agora
make
eu
this
comecei,
transition
tipo,
very
eu tinha
simple
assistido
for you,
alguns episódios
Naomi.
avulsos, porque meu irmão
Vivian
assistiu.
announced her voice
E agora eu
echoing
tô
with the
acompanhando
authority
certinho.
of a
Tô na
queen
terceira
addressing a
temporada
peasant.
agora. Entendeu?
She
Agora eu tô
scrawled her
assistindo assim.
signature at the bottom of the check, blew on the ink for a
Agora eu vou prestar
fraction of a
atenção. Ai, meu
second,
Deus. Ai,
and
meu
ripped
Deus.
it from
Ai,
the
meu Deus, gente.
binding with a
Muita gente.
sharp
Ai, meu
tear.
Deus.
She
Ai, meu
took
Deus.
2
Ai,
steps
meu Deus.
forward and held the check out. When I did not immediately reach for it, she let her manicured fingers open. The small rectangle of paper fluttered through the air, drifting down until it landed right at the tip of my shoes. That is $50,000, Vivian stated, looking down her nose at me. Consider it a severance package from your little corporate adventure. You are going to deposit that into your personal account tomorrow morning. Then you are going to call the Human Resources
Gente, aconteceu uma
Department at
coisa
Aegis Tech
engraçada aqui, né?
and tell them that the stress
Meu
of the
Deus.
position is simply too much for you to handle. You are going to resign effective immediately. I stared down at the check resting on the hardwood floor. With that money, you can take a nice trip to the spa. Vivian continued her tone dripping with toxic sweetness. You can buy some new clothes, maybe something a little more flattering for your figure. You will start attending the morning women's ministry meetings with me.
E também é que tem
You
na
will
Ellie
plan the
também.
upcoming charity
Horrível a cara
gala.
dele.
You are going to play the good, supportive wife, and you are going to let the men in this family handle the real business. Do we have an understanding? I looked at the piece of paper on the floor. $50,000. It was a substantial amount of money to an ordinary person. But to a forensic auditor who had just downloaded 4 gigabytes of federal wire fraud evidence, it was an absolute insult. Marcus tightened his grip on my shoulder. Take it, babe, he whispered in my ear.
Eu vou
It is a
tentar ir no
generous
coração
gift.
aqui, velho.
My mom is just looking out for us. We can use that money to take a vacation. Just you and me. We can put all this nonsense behind us. I slowly pulled myself out of Marcus's embrace. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between myself and the man who had bought his mistress an $800,000 townhouse, yet thought his mother's 50 grand could buy my silence. I bent down and picked up the check. The paper felt heavy in my hands. I looked at the numbers written in Vivian's elegant looping cursive.
Ai, meu
I did
Deus,
not
o cara tá
cry.
longe. Vai dar tempo de restar, vai dar
The
tempo.
facade of the broken, intimidated woman I had projected just moments ago evaporated completely.
Ai, gente.
The cold, calculating machinery of my analytical mind roared back to life. $50,000, I said, my voice eerily calm.
Oh, não, eu sou
I
muito-
looked up,
nossa, meu
meeting
Deus,
Vivian's
muito-
arrogant gaze. You want me to walk away from my
Meu Deus, não-
career,
não bate
ignore
na
a
Naomi
federal
já,
money
cara, não-
laundering
do céu,
operation,
véi.
and turn a blind eye to my husband's heavily financed infidelity for $50,000? Pastor Thomas stepped forward, his heavy brow furrowing in warning. Naomi, do
Com
not test my
certeza.
patience. Take the blessing and do as you are told. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound that seemed to lower the temperature in the entire room. Vivian, I said, holding the check between
Tá
my
pronto
thumb
já,
and
já tá
index
pronto, já tá
finger.
pronto.
Your son just wired $800,000 from a fraudulent shell company to buy a luxury property in Midtown for a 26-year-old
Ai,
marketing
eu fico
director.
em pânico, Shin. Ai,
Tyler
tô
is
nervosa.
skimming millions off the
Credo.
top of his equity fund. The two of them are running a
sabe.
criminal enterprise right under your nose, and you think you can buy my silence with the equivalent of a mid-sized sedan. Vivian's face flushed with sudden, violent anger. How dare you speak to me about money? You came into this family with nothing but student loans and a cheap degree. You should be on your knees thanking us. I came into this family with integrity.
Vou dar a cal
I
pra
shot
quem
back my
entende
voice
agora.
rising with absolute authority. Something none of you possess. You think this money makes you powerful. You think because you sit in a mansion and preach to a megachurch that you are somehow above the law. You are not royalty. You are a syndicate. I held the check up in the air right in front of Vivian's face. I grasped the top edge and tore it straight down the middle. The sound of the tearing paper made Marcus flinch. I placed the two torn halves together and ripped them again. And then again. I reduced Vivian's $50,000 bribe to a handful of worthless confetti. I opened my hand and let the shredded pieces fall. They drifted down like snow, landing directly on top of Vivian's expensive designer shoes. Are you out of your mind? Marcus yelled,
Olha
lunging
quem
forward.
chegou!
He looked at the
Olha quem
shredded check
chegou.
on the floor,
Fala aí,
as if
chat,
I
se
had
eu não
just
falei
burned
que,
a sacred
que faltava
artifact.
Luana nesse chat.
You just threw
Diga.
away 50 grand.
Diga que não
I
é-
do
que
not
não é
want your
mentira.
dirty money, I said, taking a step toward him, forcing him to back up. And I am not
Verdade,
quitting
Elô
my
não tá
job.
jogando mais com a
I am
gente.
not going to
Agora
the
a gente vai ter
spa.
que substituir
I
Elô,
am
né?
not joining
Essa
your
não.
mother's
Mas se bem que a
hypocritical
Naomi,
little
ela tá aqui
ministry.
no nosso
And I am
canal
certainly
há
not
muito
going
mais
to
tempo.
stand by
Mais
and
tempo
watch
que
you
Elô,
fund a second life with
tá?
stolen capital while treating me like a
A Naomi
naive,
é
disposable
relíquia nessa
servant.
live.
Pastor Thomas's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. You arrogant, ungrateful little girl, he boomed, his voice shaking the walls. You have no idea what you are doing. You are declaring war on the Jenkins family. We will crush you. I will personally make sure you are ruined in this city. You cannot crush someone who already has all the receipts. Thomas, I replied, dropping the title of pastor. He did not deserve it. You think you can intimidate
E aí,
me
Lu, tudo
because you have a
bem? Aqui tá tudo
congregation that
certo,
hangs on
graças
your
a
every
Deus.
word. But the federal government does not care about your
Hoje eu
sermons.
obriguei a galera do chat
The
a assistir o
IRS does not
vídeo
care about your
novo do
charity
canal,
galas.
que você já foi
They
lá,
only
né?
care about the
Obviamente,
ledger.
porque você é
And right
primeiro.
now, your family's ledger is bleeding. Vivian was
Todo
shaking her
mundo
fists clenched so tightly at her
indignadíssimo
sides
com o jogo de
that her
ontem,
knuckles were entirely
né?
white.
A gente nem fala.
You will not get a
É.
single dime from my
Nossa,
son, she
dói
hissed.
até o coração só de
We will
falar.
drag this out in court. We will bury you in legal fees until you are begging us for that $50,000. I am a forensic accountant. I reminded them, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. I do not need to beg for money. I just
Quem tá
track it.
carregando o time
I know
hoje?
exactly
Vou
where
falar
it
pra você.
goes,
Naomi
exactly how it
carregou
gets there,
o
and
squad
exactly
hoje,
who is trying to hide it.
fez buia
I turned my back
sozinha.
on Thomas and Vivian
Sozinha,
and focused
tá?
entirely on Marcus. He
Aí
looked
agora estamos
completely
aqui eu,
terrified.
a Naomi,
The swaggering
o
real
Itália
estate broker
e
was
o
gone. In his
chupeteiro do
place was a
Tobias.
pathetic cornered coward who finally realized he had brought the executioner into his own house. You thought I was just a hall monitor, I whispered to my husband. You thought you could mock my career,
Ah, que
mock
você
my
deixou,
intelligence,
entende? Então aí,
and
Naomi,
use me
ó,
as a prop
quando
while
ele
you
pedir
played
ajuda,
house with Chloe.
deixa ele, nem
But you
ajuda
forgot
mais.
the golden rule of corporate
A
fraud,
Naomi nem
Marcus.
ajudava.
You never ever insult the auditor.
Ela humilhando.
I picked up my designer handbag from the sofa. I did not look back at the torn check on
O
the
que a
floor.
Garena queria com essa
I did not
skin
look
de
at the
creme
furious
dental?
faces of my
Cara,
in-laws.
eu não sei o que a
This
Garena
marriage is
queria,
over, I announced, walking
mas eu
briskly
queria
toward the
fazer isso daqui,
foyer.
ó.
But my investigation is just beginning. Do not bother calling me Marcus. Have Tyler's corporate lawyers contact me tomorrow.
Cara,
I am
não
sure
dá,
they are
mano,
going to
essa
have a very
tampa
busy
aqui.
week.
Juro,
I
não
walked
dá.
out the front door, slamming it shut behind me. The heavy thud echoed into the humid Atlanta night. I walked down the driveway to the street, pulled out my phone, and ordered a premium ride share. My hands were perfectly
Sério,
steady.
essa tampinha
The
de
fake
sexo.
submission was over.
Mano,
The bribe was
eu já
rejected.
esperava, mas
I
espero
had
que façam
officially
time
declared
mais
war on the
entrosado na
entire
próxima.
Jenkins empire,
Pô, mano,
and I
na
was going to
próxima-
burn their
na próxima
fraudulent
já vou ter
kingdom to
filho
the
já.
ground. I did
Já vou
not
meter
sleep that
boneco
night.
já. Vai ser a
I
próxima
sat at my kitchen
revelação
island
aí.
with a mug of black coffee,
Meu filho vai ser
watching the
jogador de
sunrise
futebol.
over the
Vai ter que ficar
manicured
rica,
lawns of
mano.
Buckhead. I had taken a personal day from Aegis Tech citing a family
Já
emergency.
tem que nascer, já tem
It
que
was
nascer
not a
preto.
lie. My family was a burning
Espero que
building,
fique
and
muito
I was
claro,
holding
tem
the
que ser
match.
preto, entendeu?
I knew
Meu
Tyler would
filho,
not wait
próxima
long.
revelação aí, próxima
Arrogant men
ideia.
despise losing control, and they always rush to reclaim it. At precisely 9 in the morning, a fleet of 3 black
Boa
SUVs
noite,
pulled into
calma,
my
chocolate
driveway.
branco.
The
Ah,
heavy
não.
tires crunched aggressively over the gravel.
Cara, calma,
I
chocolate
watched through the sheer living room curtains as the doors opened simultaneously. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. My husband was a coward who hid behind his father's pulpit and his brother-in-law's bank account. Instead, Tyler stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was flanked by 3 older men in immaculate charcoal gray suits. They carried thick leather briefcases and moved with the synchronized predatory synchronization of high-priced corporate litigators. I unlocked the front door just as Tyler raised his fist to knock. He pushed
Depois
past
que eu
me
faço
without an
lamber o
invitation,
tapete pras mulheres
his
andar de
expensive
salto,
loafers
acha ruim, né?
clicking
Vê se
sharply
pode.
against my hardwood floors. The 3 lawyers followed him inside like a shadow invading my home, filling the foyer with the heavy, suffocating scent of expensive cologne and ruthless intimidation. We are keeping this strictly business,
Não, eu
Naomi,
chamo, tira
Tyler
uma dúvida,
said,
cadê os bodes
not
de
even
Arcane?
bothering
Não,
to
mas
offer a
não tem
greeting.
bode de Arcane,
He
mano.
walked
Não
straight
sabem-
into my
não
kitchen
sabem
and
mais
leaned
nada.
against
Eu
the
tinha
granite
canal
island, completely
e eu
making himself at
nem
home.
sei por que eu fiz aquele
You
canal.
asked for my corporate lawyers. I brought them. Let us get this over with so we can all move on with our lives. The lead attorney stepped forward. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes as cold as a frozen lake. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced
Pegaram esses
monotone.
daí? Foi? Tudo?
"My name is Harrison
Oxe, vai
Cole. I am senior counsel for
Não
Sterling
tem. O
Investments.
que você queria,
We are here to present a
Kaique? Não
resolution to the
pode.
unfortunate domestic dispute that occurred last
Não,
night."
aí, ó, vocês podem
Harrison
cancelar,
unclasped
gente,
his
pode
leather
cancelar, hein?
briefcase and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. He dropped them
Cheguei
onto the
hoje.
marble surface of my
Fala,
kitchen
tio Sam.
island
Tio
with a
Sam, tava
heavy,
sumido, não
definitive
tava aparecendo por
thud.
aqui.
"This is a
O que aconteceu?
postnuptial agreement,"
Conta
Harrison
pra gente.
explained, tapping the top page with a gold pen.
Ontem
"It
tinha
has been drafted
angolano
overnight by our family law
falando mal de
division.
mulher. Eu xinguei
It
até a
outlines a
última
complete
geração
and
dele, e
total
aí ele
separation of
saiu.
assets between you and Marcus.
Caralho.
By
Isso pode
signing
ser o
this,
que
you
as
agree
pessoas
to
querem.
relinquish all claims to the marital
Nossa,
estate.
eles são, gente,
calma aí.
That
mas
includes this house in
aqui,
Buckhead,
gente,
the
eles
joint
ficam
investment
essas brincadeiras,
portfolios,
eles sabem que eu
and
não
any
gosto. Sempre
future
que eles
claims to
fazem.
alimony or spousal support. I
Essas
stared at the
palhaçadas,
thick
essas
stack of
brincadeiras.
paper. "You want me
Não,
to
mas
walk
foi
away
culpa
with
do
absolutely
business,
nothing," I
Ah,
stated,
nada
keeping
não,
my
hoje.
voice neutral.
Culpa dele.
Tyler scoffed, crossing his
Ele
arms
falou,
over his
mulher.
chest.
Eu falei, então é que
"You
é.
are lucky we are letting you walk away at all, Naomi." Harrison raised a
Ó.
hand to silence Tyler, playing the role of the reasonable negotiator, though his eyes remained entirely dead.
É fácil, é fácil.
"In exchange for your signature relinquishing the marital assets," Harrison continued, "the Jenkins family is prepared to offer you a one-time tax-free disbursement of $100,000. It is a generous transition fund to help you relocate and start fresh." I looked from the documents to Harrison. "And the catch?" I asked.
Ai, pois é.
Harrison
Depois,
flipped to the back of the massive packet. "The catch is the non-disclosure agreement attached as Appendix B. It is ironclad and non-negotiable. By accepting the transition fund, you agree to a lifetime gag order regarding Marcus Jenkins Tyler Sterling, Sterling Investments, Pastor Thomas Jenkins, and any affiliated corporate entities." Harrison leaned forward, resting his hands on the counter.
O quê?
He lowered his voice, making sure every single
Cara, não
word
tem
landed
graça,
with
tô falando
absolute,
sério.
terrifying
Vai,
clarity.
vai.
The NDA specifically covers any
é
knowledge,
sério, eu tô falando
documents, or
sério,
data
mano.
you believe you
Não é pra
possess
brincar com isso.
regarding an
Sério,
entity known as
passou.
Apex
Não é pra brincar.
Holdings.
Você tá numa... Você
If
é
you speak
moderador
that
de uma
name to anyone,
mulher.
a
Aí
friend,
você fica
a
fazendo essa
coworker,
palhaçada aí.
or a
Você sabe que
government
na live tem um
official,
monte de
you will be in
menina.
breach of
Nada a ver.
contract. The penalty for breaching this specific
Não,
clause
esse
is
negócio
$10
não dá
million
pra brincar, tá
payable
ligado? Não
immediately.
dá.
I looked at the four men standing
Pode
in my
brincar com outras
kitchen.
coisas.
They had formed a literal wall around me, physically blocking my
3 horas
path
e
to the
aumenta,
hallway.
rapaziada.
They were
Dito
using their
isso,
size, their
próximo
gender,
salário da
and their
Itália vai
massive
ser
institutional wealth
10
to corner
subs
me
nessa
in my own
live.
home. It was a classic
Ai, ai,
display
ai.
of corporate
10
intimidation.
subs, 10 subs.
They
Vai ter que
wanted
dar
me
10
to
subs
feel
aqui, ó.
incredibly
Vai ter que dar pra todas
small,
as meninas
completely
dessa live aqui,
isolated, and
entendeu?
utterly powerless against the Sterling investment
Fala
machine.
comigo,
"And what
Anaí,
happens if I
véi.
refuse to sign this
Sim.
absurd document?" I asked,
Quinta ou
squaring my
sexta?
shoulders and standing my ground. The professional mask slipped from Harrison's face, revealing the absolute shark
Pode
underneath.
ser na
"If you
sexta,
refuse to sign
pra
Mrs.
gente
Jenkins,
finalizar
we will
a
file
semana
for
bem
divorce this
boa.
afternoon. We will drag the proceedings out in civil court for the next
não,
10
tem essa de
years.
zoar, parou, acabou.
We will freeze your joint accounts
Acabou, você
today,
já zoou que tinha que
leaving you
zoar
unable
e
to
vai-
pay the
e tá
mortgage on this
devendo,
house.
e tá devendo.
We will bury you in so many legal motions and discovery requests that you will spend every single dollar of your salary just trying to keep a
Brinca
lawyer
de
on
mandar
retainer.
live,
But that is
verdade.
just the civil side," Tyler interrupted, stepping closer to me. The
Meu Deus,
smug,
gente.
arrogant smirk
Esse
had
aqui é
returned
esse
to his
aqui é mais
face.
boteco que eu, é boss.
He loved this part.
Ixi, tem
He
lá na
loved
frente.
holding the sword over my neck. "Let us talk about your little stunt at Aegis
derrubei,
Tech,
derrubei. É
Naomi."
minha kill, é minha kill.
My heart gave a calculated, perfectly controlled beat. "You told us you found Apex Holdings on a routine compliance
costas.
check," Tyler said, shaking his head slowly. "But my IT security team ran a diagnostic on the offshore server last night. We know someone initiated an unauthorized mass extraction of our financial data.
Ah, tia do meu
If you
lado
refuse to
aqui.
sign this NDA today,
mano, não acredito.
Harrison is going to
Cara,
call the
veio
federal
gás, mano.
authorities.
Meu
We are
Deus.
going to press charges against
tava
you under the
pegando, né?
Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We will tell your bosses at Aegis Tech that you used their internal network to commit corporate espionage against a private equity firm." Tyler leaned down, bringing his face inches from mine, invading my personal space with the exact same aggressive entitlement he had displayed at the dinner table. "You will be arrested, Naomi. You will lose your job. You will lose your CPA license, and you will go to federal
Quem que
prison for
Felipe
stealing
Sert?
proprietary financial data. You overplayed your hand last
Eu não
night.
lembro. Você
You
fez
thought you
uma
were so
salinha,
smart dropping our
entendeu?
company name like you had us checkmated. But you forgot one very
Rapaziada, eu vou liberar o
important
código de
detail.
equipe. Quem
Tyler
entrar,
tapped his
entrou, hein?
temple with his index finger.
Código
You
de
are out of your
equipe.
league. We have the capital, we have the lawyers, and we have the political connections.
11-294.
You are just a single woman sitting in a house you can no longer afford. You cannot beat us. You cannot outspend us.
Deixa eu ver o que
And
a
you
Xuxa
definitely
falou.
cannot outsmart us. The three lawyers
Eu não
stood
queria
silently
ver
behind him,
Cara
their
que
presence
joga LOL fazendo
reinforcing
comercial de
every
salgadinho
single threat
fake.
Tyler had just delivered. They had
Faço,
mapped out
peraí.
my complete destruction.
Deixa eu colocar a
They were
pasta pra
threatening me
rebolar.
with
Aqui, ó.
financial ruin, professional disgrace, and federal prison time.
Ih, vai tão...
They had backed me into a corner,
Cadê? Você
placing a
conseguiu
massive,
ou vai ter
terrifying
também?
wall of legal
Não, pode ir.
artillery right in front of my face.
Ok.
Harrison Cole
Ó.
picked up the heavy gold pen from the granite counter. He clicked it open and held it out to
Não dá.
me. The shiny metal tip pointed
Boa noite,
directly at my
Naomi.
chest
Beijo,
like a
beijo.
tiny, elegant weapon. Sign the agreement, Mrs.
Sério, não
Jenkins
dá, gente.
Harrison demanded. Take the $100,000, walk away quietly, and you get to
Cadê?
keep your
Dé.
freedom.
Dé, vem
Fight
jogar
us,
com a
and we
gente,
will
Dé.
make
Faz
sure you
tanto tempo
spend
que
the
você não
rest of your life
joga.
locked in a cage, drowning in debt.
Cadê a Dé
I stared at the
online?
gold pen.
Dé, fica online.
I looked at the massive stack of paper that was designed to erase my entire existence
Pumpkin
and
deu uma
protect their
inscrição
criminal
de
enterprise.
grupo número 1 de presente
I
pra
felt the heavy,
Shin.
suffocating pressure of four powerful men
Você ganhou
demanding my
sub.
absolute surrender. It was the perfect setup. They had played their
Eu
roles
recebi
exactly
sub,
as I had anticipated.
parabéns.
Now, it was time for me to play mine.
Obrigada,
I kept my eyes
agradeço
locked
seu
on the
sub.
shiny gold
Meu
pen
Deus,
resting
a
in
Dé também
Harrison Cole's
ganhou.
outstretched hand.
E vai tomando.
I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds,
Gente,
allowing
mais
my
alguém vai
breathing
querer?
to become
Senão vou-
visibly
Vou
shallow
deixar
and
mesmo,
uneven.
o mesmo squad. Deixa eu ver se o
Then the
Joker vai
front door
querer vir.
clicked open. Heavy, familiar footsteps echoed in the foyer. Marcus had finally
Parabéns,
decided to make his grand
meninas.
entrance.
Isso, Ana, na roxinha. Ana,
He
você
had
não
been
quer vir pra
waiting
cá?
outside in
Você
the
tem
third
roxinha ou não?
SUV, letting his brother-in-law
Silva,
do the
vem
dirty
aqui, ó,
work,
código de
waiting
equipe.
until the heavy
18
artillery had sufficiently softened his
11
target.
294.
He walked into the
Vem
kitchen,
aí,
keeping
vem
a
jogar
safe
com a
distance
gente.
behind Tyler. Marcus looked at the massive stack of legal documents on the island,
Temos o Anônimo
then
também que
looked
fez
at
a
me.
boa pra Dé.
The sheer
Obrigada,
terror
Anônimo.
I had
Obrigada,
seen in his eyes last night
Pumpkin.
was
Obrigada,
completely gone.
gente. Amassaram.
Replaced by
As
it
divas
was
não
the
vão ver
arrogant,
mais.
polished facade of the Buckhead real estate broker. Tyler glanced over his shoulder and
Você
gave
aceita
Marcus a
boot
curt
também?
nod,
Aceito, Rafa.
signaling
Cola
that
aqui com a
the threat
gente.
had been delivered and the trap was set.
Não, eu não sei.
It was time for my
É,
performance.
o Tobias não
When I
aceita.
looked up at Marcus,
Se
I
você
made
não joga
sure
bem,
my
ele vai
eyes were
xingar até a
completely
quinta
wide and
geração dessa
vacant.
família, mano.
I let my breathing hitch in my throat.
Eu tava há
I
bom
forced
tempo
myself to
economizando
recall the
patinhas pra comprar
absolute
sub
worst
de graça.
memories
Eu
of
tô
my
com
childhood
12
to
mil.
summon genuine hot
Pumpkin,
tears.
você é maravilhoso.
They spilled over my
Pumpkin é
eyelashes
incrível.
and tracked down my face, ruining my perfectly
Ainda não tô
applied
em
makeup.
primeiro no Taps? Ah,
I
não.
let a ragged, broken
Tá aparecendo
sob
teu
tear
nome? Nem
through
sei
my
se-
chest.
Não tô vendo aqui, peraí.
The sound was loud, desperate, and pathetic. It echoed against the
Tá bom.
high ceilings of the kitchen. Marcus, please, I begged, letting my voice crack in the middle of
Cadê?
his name.
Rafael, Rafael,
I
vai colar
stepped
aqui com a
toward
gente?
him, my hands raised in a gesture
Rafael,
of absolute
código de
surrender.
equipe.
Please do not do this to me. Do not throw me away like this.
294.
I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. The atmospheric shift in the room was immediate and profound.
Ué,
The
cara,
heavy,
achei que...
suffocating wall of
Achei
legal
que ia vir-
intimidation instantly
Deixa eu ver, vai ter que
evaporated.
vir o Itália, então.
In
Vem,
its
Itália.
place, a thick wave of
Bem,
masculine
vamos ficar esse
satisfaction
squad. Se
washed
aparecer
over the
alguém
kitchen.
diferente,
I could literally see the
vai ficar com
tension
vontade de
leave their
jogar.
bodies. Tyler let out a long breath
Que horror.
and actually smiled. It was a genuine predatory grin of pure triumph. Harrison Cole lowered the gold pen, adjusting his silver tie and relaxing his rigid posture. The threat
Não
had
tenho
been
Free Fire.
neutralized.
Eu achei que você
Marcus
jogava
puffed
Free
out
Fire,
his
cara.
chest, his ego inflating to fill the entire room. He took 2 steps forward, slipping his hands casually into the pockets of his custom trousers. He
Você
looked down at
prefere
me, shaking his
PUBG?
head with an
Pô, mano, vou ter que
exaggerated
marcar
theatrical
PUBG aqui
sigh
nessa
of
live,
pity.
então, né?
He was soaking up the
A Nail
attention,
já teve
relishing his
já
role
teve
as the
franja
powerful,
colorida, esse
benevolent
emoji dela, né?
patriarch,
Não tive
putting
franja
his
colorida.
hysterical wife
O que
back in
tem
her proper
franja
place.
colorida
I
é
told
meu
you last night to
personagem do
drop this,
Minecraft.
Naomi Marcus,
A minha
said his
personagem do
voice
Minecraft
dripping
é
with
assim,
heavy condescension.
entendeu?
I warned you that you were out of your depth,
Inclusive,
but you just had to push
detalhes,
it.
viu?
You had to try and play the
Tem
smart
alguns que
corporate executive.
Volta aí, hein?
Now look at you. You are crying in your own kitchen, facing federal charges and losing your home.
Deu uma
Você não pode
saída?
dar-
I really
você
did
não
not
pode
want
dar
it to end this way,
spoiler,
but you
não.
gave me absolutely no choice. I reached
Como
out and
assim?
grabbed the edge of
Bora.
the granite counter, steadying myself as if my knees were about to give out
quê?
completely.
Tem
I
uma
let another
pergunta,
loud
fala
sob escape my
raridade.
throat, burying my face in my
O
hands.
raridade,
I
mano,
made
o
sure my
raridade, eu lembro
shoulders
desse
shook
nick, hein?
violently. I was just so jealous I cried,
Ah,
letting my
sério,
voice
doida?
muffle behind my fingers.
O quê?
I saw that picture of
Sério,
you and
demais.
Chloe at the office.
Nem sei
I
quem
saw
é
that
que você tá
massive
falando.
diamond ring on her finger. I completely lost my mind. I was so hurt that you were buying her a house that I just started
Vai
looking
ter
for
quarta
anything
temporada
I
de
could
Arganis?
find to
Não
get back
sei.
at you.
Vai.
I did
Vai
not
ter,
mean to
sim.
commit
Se vai
corporate
ter, eu não
espionage.
sei, cara.
I did not
Não-
even know what
ninguém me falou
Apex
nada,
Holdings
ninguém me
really
chamou.
was. I just wanted to ruin her
Bom,
life
vai
the way
ter.
she ruined mine. It was the exact narrative
Agora
Marcus
tem
had
uma-
tried to
O Gabi já
feed me the night
vazou esse
before.
pão de
I was serving his
pão
own
mas é o Gabi, né,
gaslighting
mano?
right
Se o-
back to
se o
him
Gabi
on a
quiser,
silver
ele
platter,
compra
and he was
Arganis.
eating every single
compra
bite without
Arganis, ele é dono da
hesitation.
Arganis.
Tyler let out a loud,
Quais
scoffing
séries
laugh.
você assiste?
He turned to Harrison and shook his head in
bom.
utter disbelief.
Ele já
Women.
vazou, ele
Tyler
vazou
muttered,
antes de
projecting his
viajar.
voice so it echoed off the marble countertops.
Ah, eu tô...
They see a shiny
Deixa eu
rock
ver o nome
on
dessa
another
série.
girl's finger, and they are willing to risk federal prison just to throw a tantrum. It is absolutely pathetic. Harrison offered a thin, professional smile, playing
Gente, eu tô
along with
assistindo
the
uma
boys'
série.
club mentality.
Meninas, talvez vocês gostem. Não sei se
Emotion
vocês gostam
often
de série
clouds
de
rational
romance e tudo
judgment,
mais.
Mr. Sterling.
Deixa eu ver o nome da série
That
aqui.
is why we are here to provide a logical, structured resolution.
Que eu tô muito
I dropped my hands
puta,
from my
porque
face,
só vai
looking up
ter
at
nova
Marcus,
temporada
with mascara
no
running
final
down
do
my
ano,
cheeks in dark
E eu
streaks.
tô muito puta.
I made sure to look entirely pathetic, a broken,
Ai, mano, não tô
desperate
sabendo
wife
o nome da
begging
série.
for crumbs of
Deixa eu procurar.
affection from the man who had brutally discarded her. I do not want to go to jail, Marcus! I pleaded, my voice rising in a frantic, hysterical pitch.
Maxton
Please,
Hall.
you have to
Alguém
tell
já tá
Tyler
assistindo-
not to
alguém
call the
assistiu essa série
FBI.
de vocês
I will
aí?
lose my
Maxton
CPA
Hall,
license.
da Amazon
I will lose
Prime.
my entire career. I have
Da
nothing
Amazon
else.
Prime Video.
I swear, I will
Uma
not say a
pergunta, nada
single
ver.
word about
Você está
Chloe.
treinando na Copa
I will
Massinha?
not
Eu
say
vou
a
treinar
word
Copa
about the
Massinha.
townhouse.
Rafa, você quer...
Just please
você
do
tem
not
eu
let them
no
arrest
Roblox
me.
ou nem, mano?
Marcus
Eu
looked
queria
over at
treinar.
Tyler. They shared a long,
Dá uma
meaningful
treinada,
look
né?
of absolute victory. Marcus had
Não
successfully
sei se você
regained his
joga.
position of power in the family dynamic,
Aquela da escola
and
de
Tyler
ricos,
had
sim.
successfully neutralized
Manda
the
salve,
threat to his
salve
fraudulent
WZ.
equity
Tranquilo,
fund.
mano. Seja bem-vindo.
They had won.
Então,
The terrified,
terminei
crying woman
essa série.
standing in
Deb,
front of them was absolute,
Max-
undeniable proof of their
Maxton
superiority. Marcus
Ô,
stepped
Dé,
closer to
escreve
me,
aí o nome da
reaching
série
out
no
to
ch-
pat
no
my
chat, não sei
shoulder
se
in a
você sabe.
sickeningly
Eu amo a Copa
patronizing
Massinha.
gesture. He was
Pois é,
enjoying
quarta-feira
this.
que o jogo
He was
contra a
reveling in my
Colômbia, né,
complete
Rafa?
submission. Nobody is
Aí
going
vai
to
ser
jail
difícil, porque é
today,
contra um time que sabe jogar.
Naomi Marcus said softly, using the exact same tone one might use to soothe a frightened, irrational child. Tyler and I are reasonable men.
Ah,
We understand that you were
você.
just acting out of blind jealousy. We are willing to
Eu
give you a
dou
pass
inglês.
on the
Não sei
hacking
escrever.
incident.
É tipo assim,
But you have to cooperate. You have to sign the post-nuptial agreement, take the transition fund, and walk away quietly.
HLL.
I looked down at the massive stack of legal
É uma série
documents
lá
resting on the
de,
marble
tipo, de escola
island.
de elite,
I let
tudo
my
mais.
shoulders slump forward,
Muito
projecting
massa, muito
total
massa, tá?
and utter
Pra
defeat.
pras meninas que
I
gostam
took
de
a
negócio de
shuddering breath,
romance e
wiping
tudo
my
mais.
wet cheeks with the
Mano,
back of my
você
trembling
terminou de
hand.
assistir, Dé?
If I sign it, you swear you will
Nossa,
not
eu fiquei
report
muito
me to
puta
the
com o final
authorities,
dessa-
I asked, my voice
dessa
dropping to a
temporada,
fragile
porque só vai
whisper.
ter no
Tyler
final.
stepped up to the counter,
Isso,
leaning
esse
his weight
daí,
over the
Max-
documents.
Max-
You have my
Maxton
word,
Hall,
Naomi.
o mundo
Sign the
entre
papers,
esse daí.
take the $100,000, and you walk away free.
Cara,
But
que
if I
final?
ever
Que
hear a
final foi
whisper about
esse?
Sterling
Nossa, eu fiquei
Investments
com
or
muita
Apex
raiva.
Holdings from
Mano,
anyone,
a
I
gente
will
vai ter que
rain
esperar,
federal
eu
hellfire
vi que
down on you so
a
fast
próxima
your head
temporada
will
vai sair em
spin. I
dezembro.
nodded
A
frantically,
gente vai ter que
playing the
esperar
part of the
dezembro pra
compliant,
saber o que
terrified
aconteceu.
victim to absolute perfection. I reached
coloca,
out
você
with a
vai gostar,
trembling
Luana.
hand
Vai
and took the
gostar.
heavy gold pen from Harrison
Esse
Cole.
daí,
The
eu não
metal
assisto do
felt
Fernando,
cold
porque,
against
né,
my
ele não gosta
skin.
muito dessas
The
coisas.
three
Pior
lawyers
que
took a
eu comecei a
collective step
assistir,
back,
depois ele
giving me room
gostou.
to breathe and
Eu
sign.
comecei a
Tyler
assistir
checked
sozinha,
his
porque eu achei que
expensive
ele não ia
watch,
gostar.
clearly eager
Aí
to
um
get
dia
back
desses
to his
ele tava
fraudulent
estudando, eu
equity
falei assim, posso
fund
assistir
now
minha
that the mess
série?
was cleaned up.
Né, no café
Já
da manhã.
pegou-
que
Marcus
eu gosto de
crossed his
assistir.
arms, a smug, victorious
Já pegou o
smile,
mochila 3
permanently fixed on his handsome face. They were entirely blind.
Eu não.
Their massive egos and
Mochila 3
deep-rooted
aqui,
misogyny
vai.
made it impossible for them to see anything
Ó, tem
beyond what
cara
they
lá perto da
expected
loja.
to see. They expected a weak, emotional woman who
Aí
crumbled
ele
under
começou a
pressure.
assistir.
So I gave them
Qual que é o
exactly
nome
what
do
they
blog?
wanted.
Morri,
I
tudo
gave
comigo,
them an
morri.
Oscar-worthy performance of absolute
Aldinair,
surrender.
tudo junto.
But as I looked down at the signature line on the final page of the contract,
Caralho,
the
dois
trembling
comigo
in my
aqui.
hand
Essa desgraça
miraculously
desse
stopped.
porra.
The tears in my eyes dried up instantly. The broken, hysterical
Boa,
wife completely vanished, replaced once again by the cold, calculating forensic auditor. They thought they had trapped me in a legal corner, auditor. They had absolutely no idea I was about to use their own arrogant paperwork to sign their federal death warrants. I needed a distraction, just a few seconds of diverted attention. I let out another pathetic, watery gasp
Nossa.
and looked up at Marcus with wide, pleading
Aí,
eyes.
Ana Clara chegou. Gente,
I asked
das
him if I
boas-vindas
could
pra
please
Ana
just have a
Clara,
glass of
que veio
water
do
before I signed my life
Tico-Teco.
away.
Tá.
It was a perfectly
Dá oi pra
subservient
Ana.
request.
Tobias,
Marcus
para de
sighed
mostrar,
heavily,
parece uma
rolling his
criança.
eyes at Tyler, as if my basic human needs were an
Deus, cara.
unbearable inconvenience.
Fala, Jackson.
But he turned around
tudo
and
bem?
walked toward the refrigerator on the
aí?
opposite side of the
Ai,
kitchen.
Jackson.
Tyler looked down
É
at his
Jackson.
phone to check a
Mano, eu tô com o
notification,
Michael Jackson na
and
cabeça.
Harrison Cole turned his head to
Oi?
watch Marcus, likely annoyed by the delay.
É,
That was my
a
window.
Ana Clara
3
veio do
seconds of
Tico-Teco aqui pra
unbroken
live da
visual
Roxinha.
clearance. What these arrogant men did not realize was that I had not spent last night just crying and staring at the wall.
Ô, louco.
I had spent
Tadinha,
it
ela tava
reading
lá
through the
comendo a
4 gigabytes of
gente.
data I pulled from the Cayman
Aqui é
server.
melhor, a Ana, porque a Ana tava
Included
vendo
in that
sozinha
data
lá no outro
dump
chat,
were hundreds of
tadinha.
legal drafts from
Aqui você vai
Harrison
ser
Cole's
bem
law
acolhida,
firm.
viu?
I knew his standard
Só tem
post-nuptial and
verdade,
non-disclosure
o Tobias é o mais,
templates
o
word
top
for
1 dos
word.
malucos aqui dessa live.
I knew the exact
ficou
font,
bravo.
the exact margin
Maluco.
spacing, and the exact legal jargon he used to construct his corporate cages. At 6 o'clock this morning, I had
Mano, eu
printed my
chamei o
own
Jackson
perfectly
de
formatted
Jackson.
version of page 4. I had
Jackson
hidden
pai.
it neatly underneath a glossy lifestyle magazine resting on the corner of the kitchen island. With a swift, practiced motion, I slid the original page 4 out of the legal packet and
Aqui não
slipped
tem
my
cadeira,
forged
senta no
replacement
chão,
right
Ana.
into its spot. I dropped the original page onto the floor, letting it slide silently
Nossa,
under the
Mas você
overhang of
tá
the
aí
granite
ainda, o pessoal lá
counter.
do outro lado,
I brought my hands
Tobias.
back up, gripping the
Pois
gold
vai,
pen,
pois morra aí
just as
mesmo, que a
Marcus
gente comprou
turned
você na
around
loja
holding a
lá,
glass of
tá?
ice water. He slammed the glass down on the counter in front of
Já,
me,
já se
water
vai se
sloshing
lascar.
over the rim. Drink it and sign, he ordered. I took a shaky sip, putting the glass down with trembling fingers.
As grandes
I looked
teorias
down
de,
at the
de
documents.
Michael Jackson está
The
vivo,
original
né?
page
Quem
4 had
nunca?
contained a standard mutual release of liability.
Quem vai
My
cair lá de
newly
novo, mano? Tá
inserted
todo mundo
page
aqui
4 looked
em
entirely
Rock Tower,
identical
e
at
você
first
aí?
glance.
Mas
But
vocês são
buried
muito
deep within
medrosos.
paragraph 7, hiding
Muito
behind a wall of
medrosos, você
dense,
que não é
convoluted legalese,
Cadê Deus,
was a
filho?
catastrophic addition.
Mano, eu matei
I had
um
drafted a
Alex.
clause stating that by
Frontman.
signing this document, all
Tá.
parties
Ô, Rafa, você tá no
explicitly
Discord
and
do Massinha?
irrevocably waived their rights to financial privacy under the Bank Secrecy Act. The clause granted full, uncontested consent for any federal agency to access, seize, and audit all banking records for any corporate entity affiliated with the signatories. I had effectively
nem
written a
cadeira tem
blank
aqui,
search
Ana.
warrant for the FBI and the IRS wrapped in the sheep's clothing of a
beleza,
marital
então,
non-disclosure
eu
agreement.
tô lá no
I
Discord do
dragged the
Massinha,
gold
você
pen
me
across the
marca,
signature
que
line
eu
on the
sempre
final
entro
page,
no Discord lá
making
e
sure
vejo
my
quem me
handwriting
marcou,
looked
aí você me
appropriately
marca com
frantic and
seu
unsteady.
nick.
I flipped
Aí,
back through
quando
the
eu for,
packet, initialing the
for
bottom
entrar, eu
corner of
te
every
marco lá,
single
avisando
page,
que eu tô te
including
adicionando.
the poisoned page 4. I pushed the heavy stack of paper back across the marble island toward Harrison.
Ótimo, né?
My part was
Subiu na
done,
casa,
but the
acho.
trap was not locked until they put their own names on the dotted line. Harrison picked up the documents. He tapped the
João
bottom
Paulo
edges
Bento,
against the
nós estamos
counter,
juntos.
aligning
A
the
verde?
pages into a neat stack.
É.
As the
Tá no
executing
último
parties
da
for the
hora.
marital estate and the corporate trust, both Marcus and
Eu vou
Tyler
puxar agora.
needed to countersign to make the non-disclosure agreement legally binding. Harrison pulled a silver reading glass case from his breast pocket. He slid the glasses onto his nose and opened the packet to review my initials. My chest tightened.
Aqui, ó.
The air in the kitchen suddenly felt incredibly thin. I kept my face buried in my hands, pretending to quietly sob, but I was watching Harrison through the gaps in my fingers. He was a senior partner at a ruthless firm. He was meticulous, sharp, and highly trained to spot irregularities. If he actually read the text on page 4, he would instantly recognize the foreign clause. He would know I had tampered with the document. He would tear up the contract, and Tyler would immediately execute his threat to have me arrested for corporate espionage. Harrison turned the cover page. He checked my initials. He turned page 2. Initialed. He turned page 3. Initialed.
Aliás, Rafa,
He
também
placed his
conta pra
index
gente,
finger on the
vocês que
top
são
left
novos
corner
no
of page
chat,
4.
eu vi que tinha mais
His
nome de
pale
alguém.
eyes scanned down the
Deixa eu ver
text.
aqui, ó.
He was reading it. A cold sweat
aqui, ó,
broke
a
out
Millie.
across the back of my neck. My heart
Millie, eu vi uma
hammered
mensagem da
against my
Millie,
ribs,
só.
beating a
Eu tô
frantic,
conversando com a
deafening
Camille.
rhythm. He was
Eu tô
moving
conversando com a
closer to
Millie.
paragraph 7.
Olha,
One more
chat.
second, and it would all be over.
Tô em cima.
Then the sound of a heavy,
Desk?
irritated sigh echoed across the kitchen.
Nem vi.
Tyler
Tá na
loudly
lojinha.
slapped his hand
Tá
against the
aqui,
granite
passou pra
countertop.
aqui, ó. No fundo aqui, ó.
Harrison, what is the holdup?
Embaixo.
Tyler snapped his voice sharp with impatient
Embaixo.
entitlement. I have a quarterly earnings call with a board of directors in 20 minutes.
Nail, que dia é
I do
hoje?
not
De
have
que
time to
mês?
stand around in a kitchen watching you
Ah.
proofread standard boilerplate. She signed it.
Nossa,
The
eu tô
hysterical
com
woman
raiva
is
boa.
handled. Let us get this done.
Ah, aqui em
Harrison
cima.
stopped reading. He looked up, his professional
Seis do-
pride
seis do
clearly
sete.
stung by Tyler's disrespectful
E o que tem
tone.
6 ou 7?
But Tyler was the
É
golden
só
goose.
quarta-feira meu jogo, né?
Tyler's
Pelo amor de
equity
Deus,
fund
Massinha.
paid Harrison's
Ó, Massinha, o
exorbitant
Rafael tava
retainer.
falando agora,
The
que
lawyer
adora
was not going to
julgar,
risk
adora
irritating
você,
his
adora
wealthiest
assistir as lives
client
do Massinha.
over a
Ô, eu
routine
vou
marital
treinar, vou
document
treinar,
that he
mano.
himself had
Falaram que eu vou
supposedly
contra a
drafted the
Colômbia
night
lá.
before. Harrison took off his reading
Vou
glasses,
contra
sliding them back into
a
his
tua amiga
pocket.
lá, que mancha
He pushed the
jogar.
packet toward
Vou passar
Tyler,
vergonha,
holding
não
out
vai
the
dar,
gold
né?
pen. Everything
Pelo
appears
menos
to be in
work eu
order,
tenho que fazer.
Harrison said. His voice clipped. Sign here on behalf of Sterling Investments. Tyler snatched the pen from Harrison's hand. He did not even glance at the pages. He was completely blinded by his own arrogance, entirely convinced of his absolute superiority over the weeping woman sitting in front of him. He flipped straight to the back page and slashed his signature
ódio,
across the
olha,
bottom
você viu,
line
né,
with
o homem?
aggressive,
Olha.
rapid strokes.
Meu nome
Tyler
é-
handed the pen
meu
to
nome é
Marcus.
Ana.
Your turn,
É
buddy.
claro. Minha comida
Tyler
favorita é
said, clapping
macarronada.
Marcus on the
Minha cor
shoulder.
favorita é rosa,
Congratulations
mas
on
eu
your
me
freedom.
estresso todos
Let
os
us get out of
dias.
here. Marcus grabbed the
Minha
pen.
cor favorita
He
também
looked
é
at me,
rosa.
flashing a cruel, victorious
Minha
smirk.
comida favorita
He thought he had beaten
é
me.
macarrão com
He
carne
thought
moída
he
ou
had
espadilha.
successfully secured his $800,000 townhouse,
lado.
his 26-year-old mistress,
Tá.
and his pristine
Acho que
public
tem mais
reputation.
ainda. Tem só um-
Marcus leaned over the counter and signed his full legal name
Macarrão
right
com
next
carne
to
moída,
Tyler's.
gente.
It
Quem
was
não
done.
sabe que a minha
The
comida
ink was on the
favorita é
paper.
macarrão com
The
carne
federal
moída,
waiver was
olha.
fully legally executed. Harrison pulled the packet back toward him. He ripped the carbon copy from the back of the stack and slid it across the island toward me. He then pulled out a sealed white envelope and dropped it on top of my copy. Your transition fund, Mrs. Jenkins Harrison stated
Não
coldly.
explode.
We expect you to vacate the premises by the end of the month. If you attempt to contact Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Sterling, or the media, you will find yourself in federal court before sunset. Good day. The three lawyers turned in perfect unison and marched out of the kitchen. Tyler followed right behind them, not even bothering to look back. Marcus lingered for one brief second.
Squad. Pera, não,
He
calma
adjusted
aí.
the
A minha
cuffs of his
comida
custom
favorita é
shirt,
o
looking around the
macarrão com carne
expensive
moída, né?
kitchen,
Calma aí.
as if taking mental inventory of the property
Macarrão com carne
he had
moída,
just
gente.
successfully
Amo.
stolen from me. Pack your
Odeio
bags,
carne
Naomi
moída.
Marcus ordered, his voice
Isso
dripping
é
with
bom no
triumphant
cachorro-quente?
malice.
Como assim carne moída
And
no
do not steal
cachorro-quente?
any of the good silverware on your way
Tem isso?
out. He turned and walked out the front door,
Gente,
slamming it shut
Coisas
behind
diferentes pra
him.
mim.
I
Purê
sat
no
alone in the
cachorro-quente,
quiet kitchen.
Carne
Caralho,
moída
I
no
listened to the
cachorro-quente.
heavy engines of the three black SUVs roar to
Coitada,
life.
né? Você tá vendo?
I waited until the sound of tires crunching on the
Nossa,
gravel
gente, pra caralho
driveway
aqui,
completely
mano.
faded away into the distance. I lowered my hands from my face. My
E no meu
skin
país,
was
Maranhão.
completely dry.
Eu
I
falando
reached
isso,
across the
que
marble
vergonha,
counter,
maranhense
picked up the
desse
white
jeito.
envelope containing their
Verdade, tem
pathetic
carne moída mesmo. Eu lembro
$100,000
que quando eu
bribe
tinha
and
12
tossed it
anos
into
de
the trash
idade,
can.
é porque assim,
I grabbed my
eu vim
carbon
do
copy
Maranhão
of the
com
legally
3 anos, né?
binding, fully
E eu
executed
só voltei
federal
pra lá com
waiver.
12. Mano, eu
I
caí
stood
eu
up,
caí
walked
e os
into the
caras já me
hallway,
mataram.
and grabbed my car keys.
Impressionante.
I had an appointment
não tinha
downtown,
muito o que
and I
fazer.
was going to be
Aí, com 12
exactly
anos,
on
eu fui pra
time.
lá
The
e eu fui
drive
comer cachorro-quente de
downtown took
noitão,
exactly
assim, verdade,
22
tinha carne
minutes.
moída.
I did not turn on the radio. I drove in
Isso que eu não
complete
lembrava disso,
silence,
agora
my
que você
hands
falou.
gripping the steering wheel of my modest sedan,
Quando eu fui
navigating the
mencionando
morning
Discord,
Atlanta traffic
deixa eu ver
with
qual que é o meu
absolute
Discord.
focus. The carbon copy of the post-nuptial agreement rested on the passenger
Acho que
seat,
é Laudina
sitting
Yu.
right on top of my locked leather briefcase. I parked in a secure underground garage and walked 2 blocks toward the imposing glass and steel facade of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building.
Morri.
The summer heat was already radiating off the pavement, but I barely felt it. I was operating on a level of pure cold adrenaline that I had never experienced before. I was crossing the Rubicon.
Tranquei aqui.
Once I walked through those security doors, there was no undoing what was about to happen. I approached the federal security checkpoint. The guards patted down my briefcase and ran it through the X-ray scanner.
Ah, mano, pelo amor de
I
Deus.
stated my purpose clearly to
Cara,
the
não
intake
dá, mano.
officer at the front desk, requesting to speak with an agent in the Financial Crimes
Hoje é
Task
sulista,
Force.
pois é.
I did
Ai,
not
que
mention
saco.
Marcus.
Fala,
I did not
Cris.
mention Tyler.
Aquilo é um
I simply
cativeiro?
presented my
Aquilo é um-
credentials
Ah,
as a
cavalo,
senior
é um
internal
cavalo.
auditor for Aegis
É um
Tech
cavalo no jogo.
and stated that I had documentation
meu
of a
ficou
massive
unicórnio.
ongoing wire fraud
Sabia?
operation. 10 minutes later, I was
Queimar
sitting in
toda
a sterile, windowless interview
Por
room.
isso que eu nem
The walls
entro
were
nos
painted a
cavalos,
dull
né?
institutional beige, and the only furniture was a heavy metal table bolted to the floor and 3 uncomfortable chairs. The air conditioning hummed loudly overhead.
Oh,
The door
esse
clicked
rolê salvar
open
nós
and
é
2
30
agents
vezes.
walked in. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s wearing a cheap suit.
Pô,
The
e
other
agora?
was a
Você
younger
vai fazer
woman carrying a
Gente, eu
thick
vou falar
legal
pra vocês,
pad.
uma coisa que eu não como.
They introduced
Eu não
themselves as
gosto
Special
de
Agent
peixe.
Vance from the FBI and Special Agent Chen
Não
from the
gosto, acredita?
IRS
Mas sou
Criminal
hipócrita,
Investigation
porque
Division.
Aqui eu morri,
Agent Vance
fudeu.
pulled out a chair and sat
eu
across
morrer
from
também,
me.
que caí já na boca
What
do-
exactly do you
Mano,
have for us
dos
today,
lobos.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Dos lobos.
He asked, his
Não tem
tone
nem como
skeptical but
sobreviver,
tem um do
professional.
outro lado lá, mano.
We get a lot of disgruntled spouses coming in here with
Impossível, cara,
exaggerated
isso aqui.
claims about hidden bank accounts
Eu
during
não
divorce
gosto de peixe,
proceedings.
gente. Eu
If
gosto de
this is
pão com
just a
carne moída,
domestic
mas não
dispute over
cachorro-quente, nunca.
alimony, you are in the
você
wrong
gosta, tipo,
building.
aquele buraco
I did not
quente?
flinch.
Que fala?
I
É buraco
reached into
quente,
my
né?
briefcase and pulled out the encrypted flash drive. I placed it perfectly in the center of the metal
Tirando
table.
espinha, peixe é bom. Eu
I
não
am not
gosto, mas
here
sou
about
hipócrita
alimony,
porque eu
Agent
gosto
Vance.
de
I stated, keeping my
hot,
voice steady
hot
and
roll.
completely devoid of
Não, mas
emotion.
tem um aí. Aí, eu
I
morri.
am here to
Caralho,
report a
viado. Tá
coordinated
morrendo.
multi-million-dollar money laundering syndicate
morreu.
operating out of
Mas é a
Sterling
única coisa
Investments.
também.
Agent Chen stopped clicking her pen. Sterling Investments, she repeated, looking at her partner. That is a major private equity firm. Yes, it is, I confirmed. The fund is managed by Tyler Sterling. He is currently skimming investor capital and funneling it through a shell company registered under the name Apex Holdings. Apex Holdings is operated by a licensed real estate broker named Marcus Jenkins. Marcus falsifies commercial real estate consulting invoices to wash the stolen equity funds and then pushes the clean cash into blind trusts to purchase luxury residential properties in cash. Agent Vance stared at the small black flash drive resting on the
Meu Deus,
table.
impossível.
You are making
Impossível.
some very serious allegations against some very prominent individuals.
Amo peixe
He said, his
frito.
skepticism beginning to crack.
Ai,
How
gente, eu não consigo
exactly
gostar
did
de
you
peixe.
acquire this information? I slid a printed document across the table. It was my employment contract with Aegis Tech. I am a forensic
Ai,
accountant,
mais
I
17
explained.
pontos.
I
Eu quase
specialize
li
in
ali
corporate fraud.
menos 17 pontos.
I discovered the initial discrepancies during a routine compliance audit of
Vou mudar
external
de
vendor
skin.
disbursements. I traced the routing numbers back to a secure server
que eu
hosted
tenho
in the
pra usar.
Cayman Islands. Agent Chen leaned forward, her eyes locked on me.
Você vai jogar como é que aqui,
If the server is in the Caymans,
Não vamos,
how did you
você tem
bypass
pra
the
jogar? Porque eu
encryption?
não-
I looked
Deixa eu aceitar
directly
o-
at her.
o delay.
I initiated a
Aê,
remote
cadê
mass
vocês na
extraction
live,
before the
hein,
host
ô
network could
0
execute a
delays?
server wipe.
E aí?
The flash drive sitting on this table
Lembra
contains
dele?
4.2
Claro que eu lembro, por que que
gigabytes
você não
of raw
aparece na live?
financial data. It includes
Eu tô
the
sem
incorporation
TV.
documents for the shell company, the
Ah,
offshore routing numbers, the
pronto.
forged invoices, and the digital
Eu
signatures
faço
linking
salário
both
de
Tyler
vez em quando
Sterling
pra
and Marcus
assistir a live.
Jenkins directly to the fraudulent
entendi.
transactions. The
Você
two
vai querer
federal
jogar?
agents exchanged a long, meaningful
Tá em live?
look. The
Tô, mas eu tô
skepticism was
lá no
completely gone now.
TikTok e na roxinha
They
só,
realized they
não tô
were not
no-
dealing
lá
with a
no YouTube.
hysterical, jealous wife. They were dealing with a
Deixa eu ver.
highly trained professional who had just handed them a
Peixe frito,
federal
arroz e macarrão e
indictment
vinagrete.
on a silver
Vinagrete eu
platter.
amo.
There is
Mas,
just
gente, eu não
one problem,
consigo,
Mrs.
cara.
Jenkins
Não consigo
Agent
gostar de
Vance said,
peixe.
leaning back in his chair. Even if this data is completely accurate, you
Poxa, não vai
acquired
não?
it without a warrant.
Calma aí.
It is
O que
inadmissible.
foi, ô?
If we try to take this to a
Tobias
grand
saiu?
jury, Sterling's lawyers will immediately file a motion to
E aí,
suppress the
Tobias?
evidence claiming a violation of the Bank
Amassamos.
Secrecy Act
Ah, foi
and unauthorized
vocês?
access to private financial
Nem
records.
tela, graças
They
a
will
Deus.
bury
Comi
us in
peixe hoje com
litigation.
cuscuz.
I
Cuscuz, eu
smiled.
gosto.
It was
Cuscuz
the
eu gosto.
exact same
Boa noite,
smile I had given Marcus in my kitchen just an hour
Batucar
ago.
odioso.
I
Sim,
anticipated
amassaram,
that.
cara.
I
Vocês
said.
amassaram, né?
I reached
Fazer
into my
isso assim é
briefcase
bom, né?
one
Mas
last
é tudo
time
boteco.
and pulled out the carbon copy of the
Pode ir?
post-nuptial
Mais alguém vai
agreement.
vir aqui com a gente?
I
Vou liberar
slid
código
the
Pix
thick
aqui,
packet
ó.
across the
5,
table,
1.
tapping the bottom corner
Cadê
of page 4.
o outro
This
delay?
document was
Dois.
executed less than 2 hours ago, I
Quem que é
explained.
você?
It is
Quem
a
é você?
legally binding contract drafted by the senior counsel for Sterling
Quem
Investments
que é Barf?
and
Fala
signed
aí.
by both
Se não
Marcus
falar no voz,
Jenkins
você vai
and
ser
Tyler
quicado.
Sterling. If you turn to page 4, paragraph
5, 4,
7,
3, 2,
you will
1.
find a very specific clause.
Ah, coisa
Agent Vance picked
boa.
up the
Então bora.
packet and flipped to the indicated
Ele
page.
Agnaldo.
Agent
Fale
Chen
comigo,
leaned over his
Kaiser
shoulder to read
Delay.
it. I recited the clause from memory.
Mano, eu
By
adoro essas
executing this
crianças
document,
engraçadas.
all
Saudade,
signatory
você tá bem
parties
também,
explicitly
graças a
and
Deus.
irrevocably waive their
Você?
rights to financial privacy
assistir
under the
quem
Bank
ainda eu,
Secrecy
mas
Act
tem ponto
Tu
and
não.
grant
queria o quê?
full
Minha skin
uncontested
de creme
consent for
dental,
any
é?
federal or state agency to
Não, é de
access,
pasta de
seize,
dente.
and audit all
Ah,
banking
e,
records
e
for any
pasta de dente
corporate
é o quê?
entity affiliated with the signatories. Agent
Rapaz,
Vance read the
pasta de dente é o
paragraph.
quê?
He read it again. He slowly lowered the document, looking at me with an expression of absolute, unadulterated shock. They signed this? He
Aqui
asked,
na
his
Bahia
voice barely a
temos
whisper.
temos
They
cuscuz
actually
com ovo,
signed a
com
federal
cuscuz
waiver
com-
disguised
cuscuz
as a
com
postnup.
goiabada.
They were very eager to protect their assets, I
Gente, eu
replied
nunca vi cuscuz
smoothly.
com goiabada.
And they were very
Isso pra
confident
mim
that
é
I was
novo,
too
tá?
emotional and intimidated to read the fine print. Agent Chen let out a low
Aí,
whistle.
vai tomando.
She looked at her partner, a fierce, predatory grin spreading across her face. We have the data and we have
Tá
the legal
bem, que
consent to
bom.
use
Tem que
it.
aparecer mais
This
vezes
is a
por
slam
aqui.
dunk. We can secure the warrants for the offshore accounts by this afternoon.
Tudo leva
Agent Vance
Maranhão.
nodded, picking up the flash drive with careful precision. Mrs. Jenkins,
Ô, Nayo,
I have been working financial crimes
mas
for
se eu
15
tivesse com a
years.
TV, não dá
I
pra
have
assistir
never seen
TikTok na
anyone
TV.
dismantle a criminal
Ah, é verdade, eu
operation
esqueci
with
que
this
tu ia
level of
assistir
surgical
filme Biné.
precision. He stood up, extending his hand.
Ah,
We
meu
will
Deus, sou
take it
eu.
from here.
Não,
I highly
não
suggest
quero.
you do not go home tonight. When these warrants hit, these
Gente,
men are going to
desculpa.
realize exactly what you did,
Aqui tem,
and they are
sério, eu
going
amo
to be
cuscuz com
extremely
salada.
dangerous.
Ai, eu
I
gosto de
shook his
cuscuz,
hand
viu?
firmly. I am not
Gosto
going
de-
home,
Aqui
Agent
tem
Vance.
cuscuz, ó.
I have already secured
Ai,
a
tem
temporary
cuscuz doce, não
residence.
sabia, achei que era só
Just do me
salgado.
one favor.
Fale,
What is that?
Carizardelli,
He
tu come
asked.
cuscuz?
When you arrest them, I said, make
Não,
sure
não
it is
gosto.
very public. I walked
Tu é
out of
de
the federal
onde?
building and stepped back into the
Pernambuco.
sweltering Atlanta heat.
Pernambuco, tu não come cuscuz.
I
O
had
que tu
crossed
come
the
aí?
point
Fala
of
aí uma
no
comida
return.
típica.
I had
Tu
officially
goste.
ignited the fuse that was going to blow the Jenkins
você come
family empire
macarrão?
into absolute oblivion.
Macarrão eu como.
I got
Todo
back
mundo
into
come
my
quase
car,
macarrão.
drove to my new apartment, and waited for the explosion.
Oh, eu
3 days
adoro.
later, the city of Atlanta gathered
Não,
to
mas vai falar uma
celebrate the
comida
very
típica.
men who were secretly
Daí-
robbing it blind.
Só gosto da
The
carne.
Jenkins Annual Community Endowment Gala was the crown jewel of Pastor
Não, e uma comida
Thomas's social
típica?
calendar.
Qual tipo de comida
It was an
típica você
event
gosta?
specifically designed to mask insatiable greed behind a thick, glittering veil of philanthropy. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel had been
Oh, cuscuz eu
transformed into a
gosto,
gilded
pouco.
sanctuary of high
Tu
society.
falou que não gostava de cuscuz.
$10,000
Tu tá
floral
mentindo pra mim,
arrangements
Zé Belém.
cascaded from
Só-
crystal
só
vases
que,
on
tipo,
every
eu não,
table.
não como muito,
Waiters in
muito,
white
eu
tuxedo
como
jackets
pouquinho.
floated seamlessly through the crowd,
entendi.
carrying silver
Tu gosta de uma
trays loaded
tapioca?
with champagne flutes and caviar.
Gosto.
A string quartet
No?
played softly from a raised stage, providing the perfect,
tu come
elegant
tapioca com quê?
soundtrack for the wealthiest residents of the city
Como
to pat
com-
themselves on the back. I sat in the back of a
Como
private
muitas
car
coisas.
idling across
Mas-
the
mas
street,
aí vocês falam
watching the
tapioca ou
luxury
falam
vehicles
beiju?
pull up to the valet.
Não,
Through the
tapioca.
tinted windows, I
Tapioca
had a
mesmo, né?
perfect view of the red carpet
Gente, nem
leading
eu
into
sei
the
qual
venue.
comida típica
The
é
sheer
de lá.
suffocating
Eu moro
hypocrisy
aqui
of the
no
entire
sul,
event was
no
almost
Paraná.
cinematic.
Aqui a gente
Inside
come
that ballroom,
pinhão,
Pastor Thomas was
cachorro-quente com
undoubtedly shaking
blina,
hands and kissing babies,
chineque.
projecting the image of a humble servant of the
chineque?
community,
Chineque
while
é pão
wearing a
doce.
bespoke suit paid for by the sweat of his
Ah.
congregation.
Aqui nós chamamos
Vivian
normal,
would be
pão
floating
doce.
through the room,
É?
dripping
me
in
vê-
conflict-free
me vê quatro
diamonds,
pão doce?
playing the gracious
Assim?
First Lady of the Church, completely
No, é só
oblivious
pão
to the
doce.
fact
Só
that her
pão doce?
perfect family was
Mas
built
aí
on a
quando tu quer quatro
foundation
pão,
of
tu
federal
pede
wire
como?
fraud.
me vê pão
But the
doce?
real
Só
stars
a
of the
pessoa vai
evening
pedir
were
de
Marcus
nada.
and Tyler. I could easily picture them holding court near the open bar, soaking up the admiration
Ah,
of
entendi.
Atlanta's
E aí
business elite.
é pão
Tyler
massa
Sterling
fina,
loved these
massa
charity
grossa?
events.
Ou fala
They
pão
gave him the
de
perfect
leite
opportunity
e
to
pão
play the wealthy
francês?
white savior, tossing a few tax-deductible crumbs
Assim
to the
como?
community while simultaneously skimming millions off the top of his
Como que eu
equity
falei?
fund. He would be standing there adjusting his
leite?
heavy gold watch, loudly bragging about
de
his
sal?
latest massive
Ah, é
acquisition.
pão de sal
And
que
Marcus would
fala.
be right beside him, flashing that $1 million real estate
Ixi, quem
smile.
foi que...
Marcus thrived on the
Zé Belém.
validation of the wealthy elite.
Vamos ter
He
que
believed
pegar
that
aqui o
wearing an
Zé Belém, gente.
expensive
Vou comprar
tuxedo
ele.
and pouring
E
champagne
eu
for
tenho um
city
cara aqui.
council members made him
Comer.
untouchable.
Meu
He
tá
honestly
misturado.
thought that because he had bullied his wife into signing a piece of paper in their kitchen, he had successfully secured his secret townhouse, his mistress, and his pristine
Nossa,
public
que?
reputation. They thought they had locked me out of the castle. They had absolutely
parece
no
gente,
idea that I
parece.
had just handed the keys to the FBI. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look like a broken, defeated wife. I did not look
Aqui
like a
pão
woman who
francês
had
é
spent the
chamado
last 3
Jacó.
days hiding in a
Tá, isso é
temporary
novo pra mim.
apartment. I looked like an executioner.
Bacatolada,
I had
carne de
chosen a
onça.
floor-length
Gente, vocês já
emerald
comeram
green
carne de
silk
onça?
gown. It was sleek architectural and
bacatolada
completely
eu nunca
unashamed
comi.
of taking up space.
O que é bacatolada?
My hair was swept up into a flawless, sharp style, and my
já
makeup
comi
was a
bacatolada
masterclass
sim,
in
gente, é que eu não
absolute
sabia o nome.
razor-sharp
O Fernando falou
precision.
que eu comi.
I wore no jewelry except for a pair of
Carne de
simple diamond
onça.
stud earrings. I did not need diamonds to project
Eu quero
power.
comer canudo.
I
Que
carried the
isso?
absolute
Achei que virou uma
certainty of their
tartaruga,
impending
rapaziada.
destruction.
Do nada
I
querendo
stepped
comer
out of the
canudo.
car. The humid evening air hit my skin, but I felt perfectly chilled. I handed my ticket to the attendant at the door
Carne de onça
and
não
walked
é
into the
literalmente
grand
uma carne
ballroom.
de onça,
The
tá,
moment I
gente?
stepped through the heavy double doors, the atmospheric shift was palpable. I was usually the quiet, dutiful accessory standing slightly behind Marcus,
O que é
wearing whatever
bacatolada,
conservative
senhor?
dress Vivian had deemed appropriate for a
Amor, fala o
pastor's
que é
daughter-in-law.
bacatolada.
Tonight, I owned the floor. Conversations nearest to the entrance began to falter.
Fernando,
Heads
o que é
turned,
bacatolada?
eyes widened. People who usually looked right through me suddenly found themselves unable to look away. I walked
Tipo uma
slowly,
carne
my
de
heels
panela,
clicking a
gente.
steady,
Carne
deliberate
de
rhythm
panela,
against
sabe?
the
Que tem a
polished marble floor of the
carne, a
foyer.
mandioca
I did not
feita na
search
panela
the
de
room
pressão.
nervously. I kept my chin high, my
isso.
gaze sweeping over the crowd with cold,
A
calculating
carne é
authority.
costela?
It did not take long to
Normalmente
spot
a carne
them.
é costela.
Tyler and Marcus were standing near a massive ice
Oxe,
sculpture
fogão, né?
carved into the shape of the charity's
Carne
logo.
com macaxeira.
They were
Nossa,
surrounded
faz
by a
tempo que eu não
group
ouvi
of
essa palavra
prominent local
macaxeira.
investors. Tyler was in the middle of
Aqui
telling
eles
a
falam
loud
mandioca.
story,
Macaxeira.
gesturing expansively with his
Tu gosta de
cocktail glass.
macaxeira?
Marcus stood beside him, laughing obnoxiously,
Gosto nada. É,
looking like a
verdade.
man without a
Fala
single
aipim.
care in
Essa
the
aqui minha mãe
entire
fala
world.
mandioca.
Then Marcus turned his head. His eyes locked onto me through the crowd. The obnoxious laugh died instantly in his throat. His entire body went rigidly stiff.
Plantei mandioca.
Tyler,
Meu Deus,
noticing
gente,
Marcus's sudden
É tudo
paralysis, followed his
diferente.
gaze.
Mandioca.
Tyler's smug, arrogant smile completely vanished, replaced by a flash
meu
of
bem.
genuine, furious
A
confusion.
macaxeira é
They had
diferente
explicitly
da
ordered
aipim?
me to vacate our home, take my transition fund, and
E da
disappear into the
mandioca?
shadows. I was supposed to be
Não,
at
é a
home
mesma
packing
coisa.
my
Ai,
bags and
gente.
crying over my ruined marriage. Instead, I was standing in the middle of their crowning
ele que
social
venha.
achievement,
Ele
looking
que
better
venha
than
que
I
eu vou
had
chegar
on our
como?
wedding day. Marcus excused himself from the group of investors. He marched across the ballroom floor,
Aí, ó.
his
Aí,
face
ó.
arranged into a
Olha.
tight, strained smile for the benefit of the watching crowd.
Eu parei,
But his
rapaz.
eyes were completely dead. He moved with aggressive, predatory speed, desperate to intercept me before I could mingle with any of the important guests. He stopped directly in front of
Dá
me,
pronto,
stepping
dá
so
pronto, já
close
dá
that I could
pronto.
smell the expensive bourbon on his breath.
Dá
What are
pronto
you
aí,
doing
rapaziada.
here, Naomi?
Ih, ninguém
Marcus
ficou pronto.
hissed, his voice dropping to a vicious, barely contained whisper. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his ear. You signed the
Oi.
agreement. You are supposed to be
Nossa,
gone.
você é louco.
You are not
Você é
welcome
louca.
here. I looked up at
Ó,
him, my expression
fala da minha
perfectly serene.
jogabilidade que tu foi o
I
primeiro a
offered
cair
him
com
a
a reserva
warm,
dele.
dazzling smile that
Não,
completely
mas, oxe,
contradicted the ice in
tá
my
cheio de
veins.
cara, né?
I am a generous donor
Se
to this
chama
charity,
carne de
Marcus,
sol,
I
nome
replied,
normal mesmo.
keeping my voice light
entendi,
and
o nosso
pleasant.
nome é todo esquisito,
I bought
né,
my
Tobias?
ticket
Só o
weeks
seu é
ago.
normal.
I have every right to enjoy the gala.
Aipim aqui é macaxeira,
Besides, I
só que
wanted to
só
be
os
here
nomes
for
é
your big
diferentes.
speech tonight.
Macaxeira
I
tem
hear it
aquela
is going to
rosanha,
be
mandioca tem
incredibly
casca
memorable.
branca.
Tyler appeared right
então
behind
tem uma
Marcus,
pequena
his face
diferença?
flushed with poorly concealed rage. He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescending menace. You are playing a
tenho
very
uma só do
stupid game,
México.
Naomi. You think showing up here in a nice dress is going to
Não,
embarrass
nem sei
us.
como que pega.
You think causing a scene is going to change anything.
Quer que eu ensine?
Turn around and walk
Sim.
out those
Ele
doors
faz
right now,
tutorial
or
pra
I
mim?
will have security physically
pra
drag you out
pegar?
to the curb.
Então perfeito. Então quando
I
terminar essa
shifted my
partida,
gaze
você
to
me ensinar.
Tyler. I did not flinch. I did not back away. You do not need to call security. Tyler, I said softly, my
já
smile
achei o Rafa
sharpening
aqui no
into a
Discord.
blade. I promise you I am not here to cause a scene. I am just here to watch the show. Marcus recovered faster than Tyler. His shock morphed instantly into a hard, defensive arrogance. He stepped closer,
Olha que
his
lindo,
jaw
ele
tight,
segurando as
his voice low and vibrating with a mix of
mãozinhas.
fury and fear.
Bonitinhos.
You are playing with fire, Naomi, Marcus muttered. I do not know how
onde?
you got in here, but you need to turn around and
Quê?
walk away right now.
Sabe quanto é a camisa
You
de
signed the
quinze?
agreement.
Quanto?
You are bound by the NDA.
5 dima.
If you utter a single word
Cinco
about my
dima?
business to
Ah,
anyone in
não.
this room,
Cinco
you will be
dima, mas
financially
a Garena
ruined
tá
by morning.
querendo tudo meus dima desse
He
jeito.
thought
Só
he
tem
was
15.
intimidating me.
E agora?
He thought the legal threats were an
Agora dá pra
impenetrable
pagar crédito.
shield. He had no
Não, eu
idea they
quero
were just the
todas.
match I was
Que eu
about to
faço agora?
strike. Before I could respond,
Eu
a
quero
high-pitched musical
todas,
laugh
Kaiser
drifted
Day.
over Marcus's shoulder. Marcus, darling, is everything okay?
não
The
dá,
crowd
mano. Eu
parted
morro com a
slightly as
Débora
Chloe
dando
stepped
emoji.
forward.
Tá
She
bom,
was wearing a
gente.
floor-length gown the color of spun gold, completely out of place for a conservative church
Nail,
charity
querida, você
gala,
mora onde?
but perfectly designed
Ué?
to draw every eye in the
Como assim?
room.
Peraí, tô tentando
The
entender a Ana
massive
Clara,
4-carat
gente.
diamond
Por que que a
sparkled
minha
on her
internet
left
tá
hand.
caindo na
She
casa
looked
da Ana Clara? Não
radiant,
tô entendendo.
triumphant, and utterly oblivious to the
moro
absolute
no
catastrophe
Paraná.
unfolding around her. She had clearly been
Não tô
hovering
entendendo,
nearby,
gente.
waiting for the
Nem
perfect
ninguém
moment to make
ficou.
her entrance.
Nossa, eu achava que quem
Marcus had
trabalhava na
brought
Loud
her.
tinha de... Mano,
He
todo
had
mundo acha que
actually
quem é
brought
da
his
Loud é
mistress to
rico,
his
gente.
father's
Quem é
charity
rico?
gala, completely
Coringa,
convinced
é
that
Loud
the
Gabi
post-nuptial
Peixe,
agreement
os
had
cara que gasta
successfully
mais de 200k
neutralized
em
me.
cartinha de Pokémon.
He thought I was sitting in an
Eu sou
empty
dura,
house
filho.
crying over my lost marriage while he debuted his new younger model to Atlanta High
Ela mora
society.
na...
Chloe
Ó,
stopped next to
Tobias.
Marcus
Ó,
and
Tobias,
slipped her
cara,
arm through his.
impressionante.
She looked at me, her eyes widening in feigned surprise. Oh my goodness, Naomi. I had no idea you were coming tonight. Her smile
Eu
was
não.
razor
Eu nem
sharp,
conheço Play Hard,
dripping
quem
with
que
a
é?
toxic, condescending pity. She was reveling in this moment.
Ixi,
She thought she had won. She thought she was the ultimate
Eu só
victor,
conheço
the
o meu
younger,
chefe,
prettier woman
Lobro.
who had successfully
Lobro apelão.
stolen the wealthy,
Ele é meu chefe da
powerful
Loud.
husband. It is a public charity event, Chloe, I replied,
Mas
my voice perfectly level,
Não é
my
da
posture
Loud?
completely
Sim.
relaxed.
E
I
o
am
meu
a
chefe é o
strong
Lobro?
supporter of the community. I would not miss it for the world. Chloe tilted her head, her smile widening into a smirk.
Não, o Lobro é dono da
Well, it
Loud.
is so brave of you to
O Lobro
show up,
comprou a
she said, her
Loud.
voice carrying
Ele comprou
just
a
enough
Loud.
volume to ensure
Tô
the surrounding
falando.
investors could hear. Especially after your
Sei
sudden
não, tá?
resignation. We were all so worried
Se
when you
eu
left
que
Aegis Tech
tô
so
na Loud,
abruptly.
tô
Marcus told me the
falando.
stress of the internal audit position was just too much for
Ei,
you.
Nail, eu vou entrar aí
It
na
must
Loud
be so
também.
difficult struggling to
Vai.
keep up with the
Daí tu
corporate
vai-
pace. Marcus
Só vou falar
stiffened,
pra tu
clearly
que hoje em
uncomfortable
dia
with
não dá
Chloe
pra
drawing
entrar na
attention
Loud,
to
tá?
my
Você
sudden
passa fome
departure,
hoje em dia.
but he did not
Passa
stop her.
fome.
He let her twist the knife.
A Loud não
I
é
took a
como
slow sip of
antigamente,
my
não.
champagne,
Vou
letting
entrar
the
pra Loud que eu
silence stretch just
vou
long
passar
enough to
fome.
make
Vai
Chloe
passar
shift
fome.
uncomfortably.
Tá lá na frente,
It was
tá lá na
not the
frente.
pace
Vai
of the
comer
work that
pão
bothered me, Chloe.
duro,
I said, my
entendeu?
tone incredibly
É.
light
É
and
do
conversational.
Ou é da Loud?
It was the quality
Loud,
of the
rapá.
data. You see, when you are auditing corporate financials,
Eu
you
passo.
occasionally stumble
Você acha que eu tenho que
across
fazer
some
live pra
very
quê?
messy,
Faço
very
live todo
amateurish
dia.
mistakes.
Mentira.
It can be
Mentira que eu
quite
vejo seus
exhausting cleaning up after people who do
Meus
not know how to
stop, e
cover their
que
tracks.
eu falo nos
Chloe
meus
let out a
stop?
soft, dismissive laugh, clearly
Ah,
entirely
vamos lá.
missing the threat
Comendo o
buried in
quê?
my
Meu
words.
filho, eu como
Well, I
arroz,
am just
feijão
glad
com
you are taking
ovo.
some time to rest.
Não,
You look
mentira, é
exhausted.
carne.
She leaned her
Que
head against
carne, rapaz,
Marcus's
nem
shoulder,
carne tem na minha
batting her
casa.
eyelashes up at him. Marcus has been taking
nada.
such good care of me.
Eu tô te
We are actually
falando,
heading
por
to
que tu tá
Paris
achando que eu
next
tô
month to start
mentindo?
looking at wedding venues. Have you ever been to Paris, Naomi? The sheer audacity was almost breathtaking. She was standing in the
pois é.
middle of a ballroom wearing a dress
Oxe, já
bought with
namorou 2
stolen
vezes,
money,
cara.
flaunting a diamond ring
Acontece, né?
financed by
Coitado
federal
dele.
wire fraud, and attempting to humiliate the forensic auditor who held her entire future on a
Manda
flash
beijo pra
drive.
Bahia.
I
Beijo
smiled a
bem
genuine,
gostoso pra
terrifying
Bahia.
smile
Tem
that
gente no
finally
chat,
made
tem
Chloe's
galera do chat,
confident smirk
mais gente no
falter.
chat que é da
I have
Bahia.
been to Paris, I replied smoothly. It is beautiful in the spring. But honestly, Chloe, I would not start booking any non-refundable
Tobias.
deposits just yet. International travel can get very complicated when your assets are frozen.
Ó, tem
Chloe
como
frowned,
mutar
her
aí? Tô
perfectly
ouvindo a família
manicured
inteira,
eyebrows
mano.
pulling together in confusion.
Nossa.
What are you talking
Tô
about?
ouvindo aí a família
Marcus
inteira de
grabbed her
final aí
arm,
de fundo.
his grip visibly tight.
Quer que eu mande ele
He
calar a
tried
boca?
to pull her
Não,
back,
calma aí, não.
tried to step between us, but it was too late. The trap was already springing shut.
Então
I
manda.
took a step closer, lowering my
Não, é
voice so only
brincadeira,
the three of
brincadeira.
us
Não
could
sabia que era
hear.
você.
I am talking about the townhouse in Midtown, Chloe, I whispered. The one purchased through a blind trust financed by Apex Holdings.
Ai, que
The one
saco.
paid for with embezzled investor funds cleaned through fake commercial real estate
Eu
invoices.
fui coçar meu pé, cocei
I
em
am
cima do
talking
nervo.
about
Meu
the
pé
fact
ficou
that your fiancé
pulando.
is
Ui.
not a luxury broker. He is a money
Nossa, então
launderer,
quer dizer que tem
and you are
gente da
currently
loja
living in a
passando.
house
Gente,
that the
obviamente
federal
que é
government
brincadeira,
is
por
going
favor,
to
eu não tô
seize
passando, mas é
before the
porque a
end of the
galera
week. Chloe's face
idealiza
drained
que
of all
todos
color.
da Loud,
Her
todos
mouth
da Loud
opened,
são
but
muito
no
ricos.
sound came out.
Só que não é,
She looked at
entendeu? Quem tem
Marcus,
dinheiro
her eyes wide
é a
with
galera que
sudden,
tem mais gente na live. Por
absolute
exemplo,
terror.
quantas pessoas tem minha live?
Marcus.
Não
What
tem
is she
tanto. Agora
talking
você entra
about?
no do Coringa.
What did you do?
Mais não sei quantos
Marcus
mil.
was
Gabi
hyperventilating
Peixe.
now.
Mais
His
não sei
chest
quantos mil.
heaved against his
Yaya.
expensive tuxedo
Mais não sei
shirt.
quantos mil.
He looked around the
Eu.
ballroom,
Menos
desperately
de 100
searching
pessoas
for
na
an
live. Como
exit,
que eu vou ser rica
searching
desse
for
jeito,
his
gente?
father, searching for anyone who
O
could
pessoal acha que
save
a
him
Loud
from the
paga
absolute
10 mil
destruction
por-
bearing down on
por
him.
mês.
Shut up,
Nunca.
Naomi, Marcus hissed, his voice cracking with panic. You signed the
Entrei,
NDA.
entendeu?
You are legally bound. You cannot say a
Otário,
word.
você não recebe
I took a
coisa
step
da
back,
arena,
raising my
não?
champagne glass
Eu
in a
recebo
mock
skin,
toast.
mas não recebo
I gave him
codiguinho.
one last
É
chilling
que eu tenho que fazer as
smile.
missões, é que eu tenho que mandar
I
pro
am
meu
not the one
moderador.
talking, Marcus, I
Ele
said, turning
fazer
my
meu
back on
roteiro
them and walking
de
toward the
vídeo.
stage.
Dima,
The federal government is going
Nem
to do all
Dima,
the talking
acredita? É que eu tenho que
tonight.
fazer as
I
missões
am
pra
just
poder eu
providing the
receber
visual
Dima e
aids.
codiguinho.
I left them frozen in their tracks and
Aí, ó,
glided
tamo
toward
tudo-
the
Ai, meu
front
Deus,
of the
tamo-
ballroom.
Sai do
The
carro,
string
sai do carro.
quartet had seamlessly transitioned into a triumphant swelling melody, signaling the beginning of the evening's main event.
Aqui, ó.
Pastor Thomas was already standing at the crystal podium on the grand stage,
Claro, você não
adjusting
Aí é
his
foda, né,
tailored
mano?
suit jacket and smiling warmly at the
Nossa,
sea of wealthy
esses
donors. The room began to quiet down as guests took their seats at the $10,000 tables,
Deus,
completely
cara.
ready to open their
Ah, mano, eu
checkbooks
apertei o
for a
bagulho do
manufactured
TikTok,
cause.
mexi na
My
minha
timing was
tela.
absolute
Ô,
perfection. Pastor Thomas leaned into the microphone, his booming baritone washing over the crowd. He spoke about community, about sacrifice, and about the
Faz
future.
em live. Mas
Then
é
he
porque eu
raised
não
his
sei
hand
que-
and
não dá pra
gestured
fazer em
toward the
live
back
porque
of
eu
the
não
room.
sei o que é, entendeu?
It is
Tipo,
my
tem um negócio
profound
lá,
honor,
aí eu vou
Thomas
falar o quê?
announced to
Eu não sei o
introduce
que
the
é,
man
eu
who
tenho
will
que
be leading the
procurar.
Jenkins Community Endowment
Não,
into
eu
its
disse que ia
next
fazer uma
glorious
missão e
chapter.
aí ia me dar um código.
A man of
Mentira, nunca
unparalleled
te falei
integrity.
isso. Nunca te prometi
My
nada.
son, Marcus
Já
Jenkins.
você
Polite
prometeu estar em
applause
todas as
rippled
minhas
through the
lives.
ballroom,
Nunca vi
but
mais
Marcus did
você.
not step
Você só
forward.
aparece pra querer
He was
jogar,
still standing
só.
near the ice sculpture, looking like he was about to vomit.
aham.
Instead, I
Eu vou
ascended the
lembrar
side
bem
stairs
disso,
of the
tá?
stage.
Vou lembrar.
The emerald silk of my gown
Não.
swept
Aceitei
gracefully
meu pedido.
against the carpeted
Eu aceitei
steps.
já, Rafa. Olha lá.
A murmur of
Ó,
confusion
fui
rippled through
responder
the
o Rafa,
front
tomei
row,
no banho.
but I kept my
Na banca.
posture
Então
impeccably
tá,
straight and my expression radiant.
Se eu
Pegue.
salvar
Pastor
a
Thomas
Bruna,
turned
eu
his
vai me
head,
dar
his
código.
pastoral
Não
smile
vou,
freezing
não tenho.
instantly as he saw me approaching the podium instead of his
E vai
son.
ficar sem codiguinho.
His eyes darted around, searching for Marcus,
Você conhece a
searching for
Maísa?
security,
Conheço, Ana.
searching
A
for
Maísa
any
é muito minha
explanation as to
amiga.
why the daughter-in-law he thought he had completely crushed
Eu até ganhei
was
umas
stepping
coisas do
into his
Roblox.
spotlight.
Eu deixei
Naomi
pro
Thomas
Pietro.
hissed through his teeth as I stepped
o
right
filho
up to the
dela.
microphone.
Eu
His voice
conheço
was
a
entirely
Maísa,
muted to
a
the
Dani
crowd but filled
Gamer,
with
a
lethal venom.
Marcela, a
What do you think you are doing? Get off this
Todas
stage
as divas do
immediately.
Free Fire.
I did not even look at him.
Oi?
I reached out and gently but
Ana,
firmly
você
wrapped my
desamigueira?
hand around the stem
A
of the
Nitrix é o que ela
microphone, pulling
quiser,
it
meu
slightly
amor,
toward
entendeu?
me.
Se um dia ela quiser
I
falar que
reached
ela é
into my
mulher, ela é
small
mulher.
clutch
Se um dia ela
purse
falar que
with
ela é
my
homem, ela
other
é homem. Se
hand
ela falar
and
que
pulled
ela
out
não é
my
nada,
phone.
é nada, entendeu?
Earlier this afternoon, I had
Nossa, eu tô
effortlessly
perguntando
hacked
se
the
quer a
hotel's
Netflix.
wireless presentation network
Ué?
using the
Como
credentials
não?
I
Tá
lifted from the
perguntando
event
isso por
planning invoice.
quê?
Good evening,
Para de
ladies
se
and
fazer
gentlemen, I
criança
said, my voice
maluca.
echoing crisply through the massive ballroom speakers. The lingering applause died down instantly. Every single eye in the room locked onto
Não sei por
me.
que eu achei que ia dar certo.
I know you were expecting my husband to give the
Pietro é muito
keynote
lindo,
address tonight.
muito.
However, Marcus is
Pois
currently
é,
dealing with a
gente.
rather urgent financial
Eu gosto
matter.
muito. Elas
But
Mano,
do
eu
not
amo
worry.
elas, de verdade.
As his
Gosto
wife
bastante.
and as a senior forensic auditor, I have
Na
prepared a
BGS do
presentation
ano
that
passado,
perfectly illustrates
eu nem lembro.
exactly how the
Eu dei
Jenkins
até uma
family
camiseta da Loud
manages
pra
your
elas.
generous
Eu
investments.
perguntei
I tapped the screen of my phone.
pra Marcela e pra
The
Dani
stage
se elas-
lights
se a
dimmed
Nitrix
automatically.
gostava da Loud.
The
Porque
three
elas falaram que
massive
elas gostavam. Daí eu fui lá e
LED
dei
screens
uma
hanging
camiseta pra
above the
cada uma.
stage, which were
Elas,
supposed to
Nitrix não é
display a
muito disso.
heartwarming
Ai,
video
eu
of
fiquei com dó depois
underprivileged
que a
children
Nitrix foi lá e
flickered
comprou
and went
a
entirely
camiseta da
black.
Loud, cara. Aí eu
A
vou ter
collective
que dar
hush
uma
fell over
nova
the
pra
St.
ela
Regis
dia,
ballroom.
né? Porque eu não dei
Then
pra
the
ela.
screens
Ai, fiquei com
flared to life
vergonha.
with blinding
Imagina,
high
comprei a blusa
definition
da Loud pra Dani e
clarity.
pra Marcela,
There
não
was
comprei
no
pra
charity
Nitrix.
video. There were no
Aí daí eu falei
smiling
pra ela, mas as
children.
meninas falaram que você nem
Instead, a
gosta, não
sprawling,
sei o quê.
intricate
Aí eu
flowchart of a
comprei, uai.
massive money laundering
Que
operation
dó.
illuminated the room in stark, undeniable detail. At the very top of the screen,
Sério?
the logo for
Mentira!
Sterling Investments glowed
Nossa,
brightly,
sou.
with Tyler Sterling's
Ó,
name
falando em Maísa,
explicitly
ó,
listed as
a
the
minha
primary
foto, deixa eu
fund
ver, eu tenho uma
manager.
foto com ela? Eu tenho várias,
Thick
né? Mas a
red
minha primeira
arrows
foto com a
pointed
Maísa
downward, tracing millions of dollars in wire transfers to an offshore Cayman Islands account. From there, the arrows converged onto a single massive black box in the center of the screen. The text inside the
Essa foi minha
box
primeira
read
foto com a
Apex
Maísa.
Holdings LLC. Registered Agent Marcus Jenkins. A collective gasp ripped through the
Nem
audience.
sei de quando que
I
é.
heard the sharp shattering of crystal as
ver.
someone dropped a champagne flute. You are all highly successful business people. I continued pacing slowly across the
okay.
stage, completely ignoring the frantic, terrified breathing of Pastor Thomas behind me. So I am sure you understand the concept of a shell company. Tyler Sterling has been taking your private equity
Os
investments,
jogadores precisam
along
falar,
with a
"Fala,
significant
RDzinho,
portion of this
suave."
very church's charity
RDzinho,
endowment,
você que
and
tava aqui
funneling it straight
no
into
time
Apex Holdings.
inimigo.
Marcus Jenkins then creates falsified commercial property
Vocês,
invoices
stripper
to
coisa,
wash that
vocês.
stolen
Você
capital
vai pra
clean.
BGS, Lu?
I tapped my phone screen a second
Rapaziada,
time.
alguém
The
da
flowchart
live pra
vanished.
BGS?
It was instantly replaced by a high-resolution scan of a property
Normalmente a gente se
deed.
encontra em BGS,
Next to
né?
it was a photograph of a stunning modern townhouse in Midtown Atlanta. This is where your charity dollars are actually going, I announced, my voice cutting through the rising tide of shocked whispers filling the room. This property was purchased 3 weeks ago for $800,000 in cash. It was not purchased to house the homeless. It was not purchased to build a community center.
Ai,
It was
cara, só
purchased
tenho
through a
viva.
blind trust to serve as a private
cedo
residence
aqui.
for Chloe Davis, the 26-year-old marketing director, who is currently standing near the ice sculpture, wearing a 4-carat diamond ring paid for by your stolen money. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Donors shot out of their chairs, their faces contorted with
Nossa, não
outrage
tem uma
and
arma
disbelief.
decente, véi.
People were pointing at the giant screens, pulling out their phones to record the evidence, and shouting demands for an explanation. The immaculate gilded sanctuary of high society had instantly transformed into a riot of betrayed investors. "Turn it off!" Pastor Thomas screamed. His
Ai, não tem
pastoral
mais
composure had
coração.
completely disintegrated. He lunged toward the podium, his face purple with rage, waving his arms frantically at the empty AV booth. "Somebody cut the power. Cut the power right now. He is lying.
Você
She
fica
is a
bem de
hysterical,
boas.
jealous woman." But nobody moved to help him. The evidence on the screen was too detailed, too perfect, and too legally damning to be dismissed as the ramblings of a jealous wife. At the VIP table in the front row, Vivian Jenkins was staring up at the screen with an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. Her perfect world, her country club memberships,
Você
her
fica de
status
boas.
as the untouchable First Lady of
Gostou
Atlanta.
da minha skin?
It was all vanishing right
Creme
before her
dental?
eyes.
Olha só o que ela faz.
The blood completely drained from her face. She let out a high, piercing shriek, clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the string actually snapped. Pearls scattered across the white tablecloth like tiny marbles. Vivian's eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed backward, fainting dead away into the arms of a terrified church elder. Through the sea of panicked guests, I saw Tyler Sterling. Tyler had realized that his entire life was
Ai, eu
over.
adoro essa
The Wall
animaçãozinha
Street
aqui,
arrogance was
bonitinha.
entirely gone, replaced by the violent,
Eu tô vendo
reckless
tá ruim.
desperation of a cornered animal. He shoved violently past a table of investors, knocking over chairs and shattering centerpieces. His face was a
Cadê uma
mask of
aranha?
pure, murderous rage. "Shut your mouth!" Tyler roared, his voice tearing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. He was sprinting down the center aisle, charging directly toward the grand stage. He was not trying to save his reputation anymore. He wanted to physically destroy the woman who had just burned his empire to ashes. He vaulted up the carpeted stairs, his hands
Vagabundo, vem
curled into
correndo
heavy
atrás de mim.
fists, his eyes locked
Passado.
onto me with terrifying, violent intent. I did not step back. I did not drop
Ana
the
Rita rica,
microphone.
viu? Tranca
I
as
stood
portas.
perfectly still in my emerald gown,
Gente, nossa,
watching
Gigi,
him
que
charge
isso?
completely
Isso não é hora de
unafraid of
chegar?
his desperate wrath. Because I knew exactly what was waiting for him right outside those double doors.
Pô, é muito bom.
Tyler was 10 feet away from the podium, his
E o zero
face
dele
twisted in
saiu, né?
absolute fury.
Beleza.
He was moving fast,
Gente,
ready to
agora vamos uma
silence me with his
saideira.
own hands if he
Cadê?
had to. 5 feet. I didn't flinch. I just smiled a cold, victorious
de
smirk
equipe.
and waited. Before Tyler could take another step, the heavy oak doors at the back of the St. Regis ballroom didn't just open, they were violently thrown wide.
Vem,
Federal
Itália.
agents, nobody move. The voice boomed through the room louder and more commanding than
Meca,
Pastor
não vou
Thomas
jogar
had
meca,
ever been
gente.
on his
Pô,
best
quem ia jogar
Sunday.
meca comigo?
Special Agent
Era
Vance,
o
flanked by a
Shaolin
dozen armed agents from the
e o
FBI
Wesley.
and the IRS Criminal
Esses dois
Investigation Division,
correram.
stormed into the ballroom.
cretinos.
They
Tá
moved
doente,
with terrifying
e o
precision,
outro,
fanning out to
mano,
secure
ele
every
tá-
exit.
eu sei lá
Tyler
quanto que ele
stopped dead in
falou
his
que ele tá
tracks
muito
mere
triste
inches from the
por causa do
stage.
jogo de ontem.
The arrogant, untouchable
Meca a gente
investment
deixa pra
fund
depois.
manager looked like he had just been
Deixa eu
struck
só
by
ver aqui
lightning.
as
His mouth
garotas
fell
aqui.
open and his eyes darted frantically around the room, taking in the sea of federal agents. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and in that split second he finally understood. He hadn't just lost his money. He had lost his freedom, and I was the one who had taken it. Marcus, who was still frozen near the ice sculpture, tried to back away, a pathetic attempt to disappear into the panicked crowd. But Agent Chen was already there, her badge flashing in the dim light.
Gente,
She grabbed him by the arm,
quarta-feira-
spinning him around and
Ah,
slamming
não,
him
quarta-feira-
face first
Pera.
onto a cocktail table,
É.
sending caviar
Pera,
and
que horas vai ser o
champagne
jogo?
glasses
Rafinha, que
crashing
horas
to
vai
the
ser o
floor.
jogo?
Marcus Jenkins,
Vou ter
you are
horário.
under arrest for
Que horas vai ser o
federal
jogo?
wire fraud, money laundering,
Deus.
and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Agent Chen announced her
Eu não
voice
lembro qual-
ringing out
O
crisp
jogo
and clear
do
over the
México com a
chaotic din.
Colômbia. Porque as meninas
On the
querem jogar na
stage,
quarta,
Tyler
só tô
didn't
vendo
fight
que horas
back.
vai ser.
He didn't say a word as Agent Vance grabbed his arms, pulled them behind his back, and secured the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The metal clicked shut with a harsh final finality. I stood at the podium, watching the two men who had tried to
Normalmente é
break me
às 7,
being
né?
humiliated
Deixa eu ver se é
and
às
hauled
7.
away in front of the most powerful
Ah, é
people
às
in
7.
Atlanta. I leaned into the microphone one last time, making sure my voice carried across the entire ballroom. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I stated, my tone dripping with absolute lethal satisfaction. I am just a glorified hall monitor, but I always make sure the ink matches the ledger. The fallout was
Deixa eu avisar.
spectacular, absolute,
Provavelmente vai ser
and
na quarta,
painfully
mas se
swift.
mudar, talvez seja numa quinta.
Federal indictments
Mas
do
alguém vai
not
querer
care
jogar,
about a family's
gente?
social
Pumpkin,
standing
você vai
or how
querer
many
vir?
charity galas they have hosted. The moment Marcus and Tyler were marched out of the St. Regis ballroom in handcuffs, the Jenkins empire began its rapid, irreversible collapse. I did not attend their arraignments. I had no desire to watch them squirm in federal court wearing identical brightly colored orange jumpsuits, stripped of
Meu
their
Deus,
bespoke
20%.
tailoring and arrogant smirks. Their high-priced defense attorneys tried to negotiate plea deals,
Isso,
but the evidence
esse
I had
o
provided, the 4
Mecha
gigabytes
Chameleon é
of
aquele de pintar e
meticulously
esconder.
organized
Aham.
digital receipts,
Esse
left them
mesmo.
absolutely zero
Posso ir?
leverage.
Pode vir. Ó,
The
código de
prosecution
equipe
had a foolproof roadmap of their entire money laundering
8270-996.
operation. Tyler and Marcus were both facing 10-year
996.
sentences in federal
Então, a
prison.
gente ia jogar
Chloe's
hoje.
Midtown townhouse was seized by federal
aí,
marshals
né,
less than
as
48 hours
lendas
after the gala. I heard
Miaram,
she
né?
stood on the sidewalk crying hysterically as agents taped notices
sim,
to the
Rafa,
heavy
que
oak
horas?
doors, locking her out of the luxurious life she thought she had successfully stolen. The 4-carat diamond ring was confiscated as
Eu
evidence of
imagino uma
fraud.
aparência para cada
She
de
had
vocês.
wanted a
Lá
rich
vem,
husband.
assim.
She ended up with a criminal
Só tô
record
esperando
and an
o
empty
indivíduo
bank account.
pagar pra mim.
Pastor Thomas Jenkins watched his life's work evaporate in a matter of weeks. The
Mano,
scandal
ali depois do
completely shattered
almoço,
his
depois do
congregation's
almoço.
trust.
Que
When the
antes do
feds
almoço eu tô,
revealed that
ó,
a significant
correndo
portion
com as
of the
coisas.
church's endowment had been
Não
funneled into
correndo, né?
Apex
Mas é que eu gosto de
Holdings,
limpar a casa,
the mass
fazer as
exodus
coisas,
of
fazer
wealthy
almoço.
donors was immediate. The megachurch, once a beacon of Atlanta's elite, faced massive foreclosure proceedings to pay restitution to the defrauded investors. Thomas and Vivian were forced to sell their opulent estate in Buckhead just to cover their soaring legal fees. The pristine, untouchable first family of
Esse que demora
Atlanta
pra achar,
was reduced to
pra tirar.
renting a modest apartment outside the city, their reputation permanently destroyed. And Jasmine, the golden child who had laughed at me for being a glorified hall monitor, found herself entirely cut off from the
Beleza.
lavish
Oi.
lifestyle Tyler had
Não é pra
provided.
te ensinar o bagulho?
With her husband's assets
Ah, é
frozen
verdade, me
and his
ensina.
equity funds seized by the
Não tem lá no
IRS,
perfil,
she was forced to
embaixo, não tem
sell
uma
her
loja?
Chanel bags and
Aham.
designer shoes just to afford
Aperta.
groceries.
Lá embaixo?
Last I heard, she was working a minimum wage retail job
Lá em
at a
cima?
local mall, learning exactly what it meant to count pennies
Tá
for a
vendo o
living.
perfil?
The chaos faded,
Tô
the
vendo a
dust
loja.
settled, and the
Aham.
silence returned.
Ah,
It was a
clica
clean,
na loja.
absolute silence,
Cliquei na loja.
completely devoid of their arrogant
em
voices
moda.
and fake piety.
Moda. Vi em moda.
I was finally alone,
Aí vai
entirely
em
free
blusa.
from the suffocating cage they had spent
Blusa.
years trying to build around me. I kept my
Aqui na
career,
blusa.
I kept my
Aham.
dignity,
Ah, 5 tá
and I
cada
watched the
uma.
empire they loved, more than their own souls, burn straight to the
Ixi,
ground.
qual que eu vou
The
tá
camera
comprando?
slides
Não quero
slowly
todas, não.
backward, pulling out of the flashback and settling back into the dimly lit,
A
elegant
do
living
Brasil
room where
não
I
é
sit
muito
right
bonita,
now.
não.
The
Porque
emerald
não é
green
verdadeiro.
velvet of my armchair feels soft against my skin. The air is cool, and the only sound is the faint rhythmic ticking of a vintage clock on the mantelpiece. I reach over and pick up my crystal
A da
wine
Argentina é
glass.
massa.
The deep red liquid swirls
não.
gently as I lift
Eu
it
achei
to the
essa
light.
legal.
People always ask me how I managed to survive it, I say, looking directly into the lens. How I stayed so calm when my
Sim,
entire world was
sim.
actively trying to destroy me. The truth is,
A
I
doméstica
did
eu já
not just
tenho.
survive it. I calculated it. I let them underestimate
Sim,
me because
cala a
arrogance is
boca,
the
Sara.
absolute best cover for a forensic audit. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my
Gente,
tears were
delay.
weakness.
Dá
They
pronto,
were so
rapidão.
blinded by their own
Pronto, bora.
massive egos that they never even realized I was
Comprei.
quietly tying the noose they were eager to
A Dé
put
tem
around
cabelo.
their
Ó
own
lá, a
necks.
Shin
I
tá
take a
imaginando
slow,
cada do
deliberate
chat.
sip of the
Você viu,
wine.
Dé? A Dé.
It tastes incredibly
Você viu o que ela
expensive
falou?
and completely
Que ela
perfect.
imagina como você é?
If there is one thing you take away from my story,
Sério, gente,
let
não
it be
dá.
this.
Não dá, né, Argentina?
I
Não,
continue,
né?
my
Pelo amor de
voice
Deus.
dropping to a smooth, unwavering whisper.
Pelo amor de
Never let
Deus.
anyone convince you that your worth is defined by their approval. If they mock your career, if they disrespect your boundaries, if they try to use their power to make you feel small, do not scream. Do not cry. Do not beg them to see your value. I lean slightly forward, my eyes locking onto yours with absolute terrifying clarity. Just step back, stay quiet, and follow the money. Because the money never ever lies. And once
Você é
you find the
líder?
ledger,
Não.
you hold the entire
Você é
kingdom
líder
in the
de nada.
palm of your hand. I lean back into the emerald
Graças a
chair,
Deus que não
offering
pegou-
one
não, nem
last
fale,
chilling,
mano, do Brasil.
perfectly victorious
Nossa,
smile.
já me estresso,
Cheers.
já me
The
estresso.
screen slowly fades to
Ô, Baby
absolute black.
Dix, na